Good evening, everyone. We'll begin today's hearing momentarily. My name is Chris White, and I will be your moderator. Today, we will hear 3 formal presentations followed by public testimony. Please note that the public testimony portion of today's meeting, individuals will be limited to 3 minutes each. We'll call upon you in the order in which you signed up. When we call your name, please unmute your computer and begin speaking. If you're not able or are running into technical problems, we will call upon you again. If you did not pre-register and wish to give testimony, you will have an opportunity to speak once we conclude the list of those who pre-registered. If you are unable to testify today, or if you changed your mind, your testimony may be submitted directly to the board. We have a timer set up to help us adhere to the 3-minute testimony limit. Please look for the timer window now. You may wish to pin it. When you see the yellow light, your time is coming to a close. When you see the red light and hear a beep, your time has ended, and we ask that you please conclude your thoughts at that point. We have some important ground rules to share before we begin. You have been muted upon entry and will remain muted unless you have been called upon to speak. This will help eliminate background noise. Please silence all electronic devices to avoid background noise or echoing when you speak. Any distracting video will be disabled. Any abusive language or offensive behavior will result in removal from the hearing. Please also note that this hearing is being recorded. A final reminder to please speak slowly, so our interpreters have time to hear what you are saying. Now, we will hear from our Wage Board Chair, Brenda McDuffie. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chris, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 3rd public hearing of our reconvened Farm Wage Board. I am Brenda McDuffie, and I'm serving as the chair. I would like to reintroduce my fellow board members representing the Farm Bureau, Mr. David Fisher, and representing New York State AFL-CIO is Mr. Dennis Hughes. We are working together to make sure that we hear not only your verbal testimonies, but any written information that you have provided. So I want to thank them for that. And thank you for being here this evening. Before we move ahead with the hearing and the testimonies, as well as the presentations we have for this evening, I want to remind you again of the ground rules and the general order of our hearings. Individuals, as you've heard from Chris, will be testifying for 3 minutes maximum. If you could please adhere to that so that we are respectful of the time as well as the large number of individuals that we have to hear from tonight. We have a timer set up so that you're aware of that, and you'll hear the timer beep, and we ask that you conclude your remarks at that point. Today's hearing is being recorded. The recordings and transcripts will be available on the Department of Labor's website. That website is dol.ny.gov. Now, before I move forward, I have indicated to you that we have a rather full agenda, and I just want to take a minute to check in with my 2 fellow board members. I want to make sure that we can hear from everyone and really appreciate my board members' commitment in our late hearing earlier this week. For tonight, we have 3 10-minute presentations. Those presentations will be followed by around 80 individuals who have signed up to testify. And so I want to make sure that we're okay. We will take a break as necessary. All you do is have to alert me. We had this evening planned to hear the video, any video presentations that were also limited to 3 minutes. And it's my understanding at this point in time, and the time is closed for those, that we have those for approximately 1 hour. So I am recommending that we defer those to another meeting so that we can hear as much testimony tonight as possible. I therefore would ask that the board members be prepared to have a meeting next week to view the video submissions, to potentially hear from anyone that has signed up for tonight that we may not be able to hear due to time, and to have a general board meeting at that time. I don't believe this would extend any deadlines. I don't want to extend any deadlines for submissions. I want to adhere to that and limit the testimony only at that additional meeting for anyone who has already signed up based upon our already set deadlines as indicated on our website. I believe that there is concurrence by my fellow board members that Friday, January 28th may work for that meeting. In addition, we have had a late request from Senator Ramos, who is signed to testify and is requesting to testify at the beginning of the meeting, be the first testimony. And I'd like to hear if there's any discussion or concern or pleasure of the board members relative to any of the items, but particularly before we start our testimonies and presentations.
I'm good
Dennis?
with all of it. I'm good. It's fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Brenda, that's fine with me. I guess just point of clarification, or so I'm clear, are we gonna like cut it off at a certain number tonight, or and have them on next week, or are we gonna try to get through everybody that's on the list tonight and then just do recordings next week? Because it looks like we're gonna be very late if we get through this whole list. plus
It looks like
presentation.
we're going to be a little late. On Tuesday this week, we wind up ending a little shy of about 9:15 or so. And we heard approximately 81 testimonies. As you're aware, we took one break and we pressed to move forward. So if everyone is respectful of time and we press, we may be able to end around that time. If you feel that you can't absorb anymore, and we want to be mindful of listening to everyone, then we will end at a reasonable hour, but no later than 9:30. And we would take those individuals first on the 28th, when we would be reconvened. But our goal is, if possible, let's see how much we can get done.
Okay, I guess my preference would be we end by a little more reasonable time than 9:30, but
I'm going to say you did it before. Come on, we can do it again.
so.
And we'll take a
Okay.
break.
Well,
So
if we're gonna
you
meet
break-
again anyway, then I just wonder if we might push some of those to the next one, but that's. I'll
Well,
defer.
let's check in about 8:30. Is that reasonable?
Sure.
And then we could at least alert those individuals. Okay,
Okay.
let's
Yep.
see how far we get.
Okay.
All right. With that, and no objection, we can proceed with our hearing. And Chris, you'll be introducing the three presentations. And then, as you heard, we'll start with Senator Ramos and then proceed in the order in which individuals signed up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will begin tonight with three presentations, as Chair Duffy said. Our first presenter is going to be Chris Wolf from Cornell University. And just a quick point to those presenting tonight, if you do have slides, just let me know and I will allow you to share your screen. That's not an issue. Just let me know that. And we'll put 10 minutes on our timer as well to ensure that we're keeping those presentations to the time allotted. But Chris, we will unmute you and let me know if you need to be able to share.
I would like to share, please.
Okay, wonderful. I will allow you. There you go.
Okay.
Great.
Let me see if I can get it right here. We all good on that?
We can see. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Start my own clock. Thank you for letting me talk to you today. Madam Chairwoman and Board, I'm happy to talk to you. My name is Chris Wolf, and I'm a professor of agricultural economics at Cornell University in the Dyson School. I led a team of researchers and extension specialists this last year to examine the farm implications of the ag overtime laws. The objectives were to understand the effect on labor costs and availability from the 60-hour overtime limit in 2020, which was the first complete year that we had, to estimate the potential effects of a lower overtime limit. And we looked specifically at 50 and 40 hours overtime threshold and ag production costs and competitiveness, and to examine the implications of overtime on the competitiveness in general of New York agriculture production, focusing on key industries. What I want to talk to you about today briefly is just an overview of some of the findings. There is an extension bulletin that summarizes the entire report, and I'm happy to share with anybody, or they can find it on the Dyson website. So for methods, to look at the 2020 effects, we evaluated secondary data, which is to say, we looked at farm financial summaries. We, in this case, specifically looked at dairy and fruits and vegetables. Of course, there's much more to New York agriculture than that. New York has very diverse agriculture, but we had limited amount of time and ability to get this done. So we decided to focus on the big industry, in particular with dairy being the largest one. And then New York agriculture being so diverse, we looked at fruit and vegetables too, because they're important and highly affected by this. Then to look at the potential effects, and keep in mind, these are potential effects because we haven't put this in place, of the lower overtime thresholds. We used detailed surveys and interviews where we sat down with farm operations. And in this case, we did 40 New York farm operations, 20 dairy farms, and 20 that were fruit and vegetables. We conducted these interviews in July, August, and September of 2021, and then summarized it and produced the report. And so I'm going to talk about that. The other thing that we did was look a little bit at H2A workers, but my colleague Rich Stupp is going to talk to you about that later, so I will not spend time on that. If just looking at the impacts then of the 2020 labor costs from the 2020 overtime limits, this is from 159 dairy farms that are part of the Cornell Dairy Farm Summary. We limited it to the same 159 farms that we had both years. This is not a random sample. These are better managed than typical farms. And for that reason, I would actually argue that the labor cost increase is likely to be lower than what it would be for the average New York farm. Because again, very well managed farms here. And if we look at it, then the total payroll cost increase was about 8% in 2020 compared to 2019. And there were some other extenuating factors in there. That's definitely true. There were some pandemic effects and so on and so forth. But that 7.8%, so almost 8% average in total payroll costs compared to an average of 3.2% annually in the previous 9 years. So a much larger than average increase in total payroll. If we look at cost per hired hour, it was an almost 6% increase compared to an average of 1.9% in the previous 9 years. These farms over time became more efficient, and partly that offset things. So the cost per hundredweight sold, which farms do more than sell milk, but was a 3.6%. looking at fruit farms, and this is from the Ontario Fruit Farm Summary, which Mark Weltberger does. So this is a much smaller sample of farms, but we just don't have the same financial summaries in some sense. The average increase per bearing acre in wages and salary was 4%. Other employee expenses went up by 6% of 2020 compared to 2019. And total employee expenses per bearing acre went up by 4.4%. It's important to keep in mind that labor is by far the largest expense on fruits and vegetable farms, and this is fruit in this case, and it's the second largest expense on dairy farms. So when that goes up, it has important implications for the bottom line of these farms. When we queried these farms about what their responses were, how did they deal with the 60-hour overtime limit? Farms in general of all different types mentioned that they implemented tighter control over employees in the sense of allocating the labor. You know, a lot of times the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and in this case, when you make labor more expensive, you're going to get a focus on labor to do, you know, what they could to most efficiently utilize it. Farms invested in labor-saving technologies where possible, but was both true on dairy farms and things like robotic feed pushers and things of that nature. It was also true as far as investing in machinery and equipment to improve labor productivity on the fruits and vegetable farms, where you do things like harvest platforms and things of that nature. But it's also important there to keep in mind that these type of investments work better on some farm sizes and some production technology packages than others. So everybody can't just do this, and all commodities can't do this. Some dairy farms moved some enterprises and tasks off farm. So for example, perhaps you sent the replacement heifers somewhere else, used a custom heifer raiser, used a custom harvester, things of that nature. Dairy farms indicated that there was significant investment on hold in many cases, waiting to see how this was going to shake out as far as future changes in labor regulations. On the fruits and vegetable farms, there was many farms that switched to less labor-intensive crops. So in that sense, the farms became less diversified as far as output because it just was too expensive if you had to pay overtime at harvest to do some of the particular crops. And many farms mentioned that they left at least some, left at least some crop in the field in the sense that it was too expensive to do an additional pass. Maybe they would normally do 5 passes through the field for harvest, but they couldn't afford to do that. And so they did 4. And so that resulted in less crop being harvested and more left in the field. Now, when discussing potential responses to the 50-hour overtime limit, many farms mentioned that the easy fixes had already been adopted this past year, so the increase would be more significant if you went lower than the 60-hour limit. Farms of all different types mentioned that they would like to hire more employees to spread the hours out if possible. On the dairy farms, there was a quarter indicated that they would look to do relocate outside of New York if they could avoid regulation that way, if it just got too expensive. And a significant percentage mentioned that they would delay or cancel investments or maybe exit agriculture entirely. For fruits and vegetable farms, the most consistent response was that they wanted to hire more labor. And in this case, many of them would want to hire more H-2A workers to spread out hours. They were very concerned about whether they would be able to attract H-2A workers if they capped the hours to keep the costs under control. There's also significant implications to bringing in more H-2A workers in the sense that you've got to invest in housing, which is a permanent long-term investment. Several of them also mentioned, not a majority, but a significant percentage, that they would delay or cancel investments and maybe downsize or exit farming. And then the 40-hour limit, just to get to that, farms would look to hire more employees if available. Many farms were concerned with the current situation as far as the labor tightness, especially in rural communities, whether they would be able to find the labor. At 40 hours, the dairy farms, 45% of them indicated that they would delay or cancel investment. 40% would downsize or exit farming. There was some overlap between the delay or cancel investment, the exit farming, and things of that nature. But if you take away the overlap, in total, 2/3 of the farms interviewed indicated they would move out of milk production or look to other places or exit agriculture in general. And on the fruits and vegetable side, half of the farms then indicated that they would have some overlap there between shrinking enterprises or exiting the industry. Then finally, just to finish up here, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the potential impact on competitiveness of of New York agriculture relative to their competitors around the country and internationally. With labor being such an important cost on farms, the increased production costs of New York producers relative to the competitors in other locations that have less costly regulations, because as was mentioned here before, there's a handful of states right now that have these regulations. There's no nearby states with ag overtime laws. So New York is the only state in the kind of the regional markets that are key to the dairy and fruit and vegetable producers in New York. And so they will be, everything else equal, at a competitive disadvantage there. In the longer term, the cost and regulatory environment is consideration as far as farm location and investment. And you saw that in the kind of responses, and these were thoughtful responses, by the way, that they would have to look elsewhere if they had to have these costs. And then finally, the community impacts really. We see a lot of structural change in agriculture in general. These type of regulations are likely to hasten the structural change in farm consolidation. That's just a reality here. And the loss in the farm numbers is going to affect the employment and in particular, the spending in the local economy in rural areas. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
And board, we've unmuted you if you have any questions for Chris. Okay.
Just to say thank you, Chris, for your presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We're going to then move to our second presentation. This will be two presenters who will bring on simultaneously, and they'll, I think, go consecutively. The first is going to be Rebecca Dixon from the National Employment Law Project, and Paul Sun as well from the National Employment Law Project. We will unmute you, and I've allowed you to share your screen should you have slides.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. We urge the Wage Board to follow the lead of California and Washington State and extend farm workers the right to overtime pay after 40 hours per week, a right that virtually all other New Yorkers have enjoyed for decades. The discriminatory exemption of farm workers from labor protections like overtime is, in the words of President Biden, an unconscionable race-based exclusion put in place generations ago that must be ended. Its historical origins are in the Jim Crow compromises by Congress aimed at preserving the South's plantation economy, continuing the economic exploitation and subordination of Black Southerners. Today in New York, this exemption operates to deny equal protection to the state's largely Latinx farm workers. In the 30s, when the lawmakers drafted the Federal Labor Standards Act, Southern lawmakers were adamant that regulating minimum wages and overtime pay for farm workers would overturn the social and racial hierarchies of the plantation system in the South, where most of the farm workers lived and where most of the workers were Black. For example, Georgia Representative Edward Cox argued by setting equal labor standards for Black and white workers in underpaid sectors, the act would allow for the elimination and disappearance of racial and social distinctions that determine the relationship of various groups of people in the South. As Florida Representative James Wilcox similarly explained, there is another matter of great importance in the South, and that is the problem of our Negro labor. There has always been a difference in the wage scale of white and colored labor. You cannot put the Negro and the white man on the same basis and get away with it. Over the objections of Black-led civil rights organizations, powerful Southern Democrats went ahead with these exclusionary exemptions. Later, in 1966, the act was finally expanded to cover some farm workers with minimum wage, but the omission of a corresponding overtime pay requirement after 40 hours has left farm workers subject to overwork and exploitation and denied them the equal protection of our employment laws. This history has been similar in New York, where for decades, farm workers remained entirely excluded from the right to overtime pay, and virtually all other manual laborers already have that right. In 2019, the legislature extended a minimal right to overtime pay after 60 hours a week, a meager standard that no other workers in the state are subject to. This unfair treatment consigns New York's disproportionately Latinx farm worker workforce to overwork and substandard pay and the high poverty rates that come with them. This history and impact of the farm worker overtime exemption doesn't mean that today's farm employers in New York harbor ill will towards their workforces. You have heard at these hearings and from farmer employers who are people of goodwill and struggling to make a living in a challenging industry. The current farm labor staffing model relies on structurally racist employment laws that accept as the norm a model of overwork and substandard pay, not tolerated in any other industry. It does not have to continue this way. Behind the structural inequity are individuals, families, and communities all seeking to thrive, and we all count on their skills and valuable contributions every time we sit down to eat. We are all in relationship with these farm employers and workers. We do not have to remain in a relationship in an unjust system. It is time once and for all to redress this inequity by finally guaranteeing that farm workers have the same overtime pay protections other laborers have long enjoyed. With the appropriate phase-in period and assistance such as a tax credit that Governor Hochul has proposed, New York can and should follow California and Washington State's lead and transition its farm economy to a system that ends overwork and substandard pay by finally affording farm workers the equal protection of the law. Thank you so much for the opportunity to submit this testimony.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. So, hello, everyone. My name is Paul Son. I'm the State Policy Program Director at the National Employment Law Project. And as you just heard from my colleague and our Executive Director, Rebecca Dixon, we urge the Wage Board to make New York the next state to phase in for farm workers the same 40-hour overtime that most other essential workers have long enjoyed. I've submitted detailed written testimony. I'll summarize some of the key points now. First, the fact that California and Washington State are now phasing in 40-hour overtime and that Oregon is considering doing the same show how New York can make this transition. California's standard has been phasing in for several years. For larger farms, it was 45 hours last year, and now is 40 hours as of January. There's a slower phase in for smaller farms. Washington State started phasing in this year with 55 hours and will reach 40 by 2024. And Oregon is considering legislation that may lead them to join later this year. Second, as the Economic Policy Institute's Daniel Costa will testify later this evening, California's economic indicators show no evidence that the overtime transition there has been disruptive or unmanageable. In particular, California is experiencing no increase in farm closures. This calls into serious question the predictions of widespread closures that you heard earlier this evening from Mr. Wolf. That's not surprising because the Cornell report's predictions about farm closures were based solely on a survey of farm employers, a group that by and large opposes farm worker overtime and has a natural tendency to exaggerate their likely responses to it. Third, the states that are phasing in 40-hour overtime are among the top national producers in New York's top agricultural sectors. And first is dairy, New York's largest ag sector. California is the nation's #1 dairy state. It also has a minimum wage of $15 an hour, nearly $2 higher than New York's $13.20 upstate minimum wage. And while New York does not directly compete with California in the regional dairy market, the fact that California dairies are now operating with 40-hour overtime demonstrates the feasibility of doing the same here. New York's second biggest sector is miscellaneous crops. California has the nation's largest market share, followed by Oregon. Again, both states that either have 40-hour overtime or are considering it. Finally, in apples, one of New York's largest ag sectors, Washington State is #1 in the nation and New York's top competitor. New York is #2. Washington is not only phasing in 40-hour overtime, but it also has a $14.49 minimum wage, more than $1 higher than New York's. This means New York's apple industry can phase in 40-hour overtime without being undercut by Washington. Fourth, the opponents of 40-hour overtime have predicted that if adopted, it will lead farm workers, including H-2A workers, to seek employment in other states, worsening the farm labor shortage. However, as you'll hear from Daniel Costa, that has not happened in California. Moreover, the notion, as has been suggested, that New York farm workers would flee the state to work in Pennsylvania, where the minimum wage is just $7.25 an hour, almost $6 an hour lower, is highly implausible. Fifth, opponents argue that 40-hour overtime will lead to a reduction in net farm worker earnings. Again, the evidence in California suggests otherwise. To be sure, with 40-hour overtime, employers will strive to hire more workers in order to reduce overtime usage. That's one of the intended effects of overtime, to reduce overwork. In California, average farm worker weekly hours dropped from 42.8 to approximately 41.9 as overtime phased in. But because of the perennial farm labor shortage, employers are very unlikely to be able to eliminate all overtime hours. As I think you heard the same from Mr. Wolf, and farm workers receive time and a half premium pay for the hours over 40 that they do work. And that's again what we see in California. Average weekly hours are still above 40. That means that the net impact for farm workers is likely to be less overwork combined with higher overtime pay. Overall, it should translate to roughly comparable net earnings. Sixth, the legislature instructed the wage board to consider overtime rates in similarly situated industries in determining whether to lower the overtime threshold. In fact, there are a wide range of industries that confront conditions similar to those as in agriculture, and yet operate with 40-hour overtime. For example, fruit and vegetable farming is not unique in facing seasonal spikes in labor needs. Same is true for retail, construction, landscaping, and resort hotels, but they all have operated under 40-hour overtime for decades. It's also worth noting that New York's largest agricultural sector, dairy, is not substantially seasonal at all. And while the dairy industry requires staffing 7 days a week over long hours, since cows must be regularly milked and cared for, the same is true in other industries. Take, for example, hospitals or emergency response services. They must provide around-the-clock coverage, yet operate with 40-hour overtime. Seventh and finally, agriculture is one of the nation's most dangerous industries, with a workplace fatality rate of 6 times the all-industry average. Excessive work hours have been shown to increase injuries and deaths for farm workers, and 40-hour overtime can reduce them. New York has long been a progressive beacon in protecting workers in the same way that we joined with California to lead the nation to a $15 minimum wage. New York should now join with California, Washington, and other states that are doing the same for 40-hour farm worker overtime. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Board, we've unmuted you if you have any questions for Rebecca or Paul.
No, thank you, Paul and Rebecca.
I would just say I'm very disappointed. We were told this was a report. This was not a report. There was no data in it. And there is good data that will be provided that shows that crops are leaving California for Mexico for cheaper labor. So thank you.
Mr. Fisher,
I didn't need it.
Okay. My written testimony contains data. It's the data that I've summarized.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you both.
We'll now move on to our third presentation. It will be another panel. This will be Daniel Costa from the Economic Policy Institute and David Kalik from the Immigration Research Initiative. We will unmute you, and if you have slides, I've allowed you the ability to share as well.
Thank you very much, members of the board. It's a real honor to be here before you and getting to speak about this. I'm going to attempt to share my slides here. Hopefully it works.
We can see
Are
them.
you able to see that?
Yep.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you. So I'll just begin by saying a few words about how farm workers provide an essential service but are vastly underpaid at the moment. This chart here shows what I call the farm worker wage gap. Essentially what it shows is that farm workers are some of the lowest paid workers in the entire US labor market, even compared to the two groups of workers with the lowest levels of education in the US, those with only a high school diploma or without a high school diploma. Farm workers even earn less than them on average. And finally, the chart shows that farm workers earned just $14.62 per hour on average in 2020, which is just 60% or 3/5 of what the production and non-supervisory non-farm workers earned. And those workers are relevant because they're the most appropriate cohort of workers outside of agriculture to compare with farm workers. And for the record, I didn't make up that comparison. That is something that the USDA does and states regularly. Next, I'll just state briefly how the California overtime rule for farm workers is being implemented, which you can see a summary of on this chart. California's Assembly Bill 1066 from 2016 created a timetable for workers employed in agriculture to receive overtime pay on the same basis as workers in most other industries. In other words, time and a half after 8 hours per day or 40 hours per week. But AB 1066 created a phase-in period so that employers could have time to adjust to the new rules. Since January 1st of this year, all employers with more than 26 employees are now paying overtime after 8 hours per day or 40 hours per week. And farms with 25 or fewer employees are subject to a delayed phase-in period beginning of this year and ending on January 1st, 2025. Next, just go briefly through some indicators about California's farm economy and labor market and point out that they've held steady since implementation of the state overtime requirement for farm workers. First, this chart shows that average hours worked by farm workers in California have remained constant during the overtime phase-in period. These data come from the USDA's farm labor survey. So to be clear, they do not include workers brought to farms by farm labor contractors, but they do offer a good baseline in terms of hours worked. The chart shows that between 2014 and 2018, the 5 preceding years to the overtime phase-in period, California's farm workers worked an average of 42.8 hours per week. In the 3 years since the provisions have been in effect, farm workers worked an average of 41.9 hours per week, which is less than a 1 hour difference from the 5 preceding years. Next, this chart shows that the total wages paid by agricultural employers to farm workers in California increased more slowly after passage of California's agricultural overtime law. As you can see in the 5 years leading up to the beginning of the overtime phase-in period, wages increased in nominal terms by an average of 5.5% per year. But when considering the years the year immediately before it and until 2020, wages increased on average by 4.9% in nominal terms. What that means is that the California overtime law did not lead to a sharp increase in total wages paid by agricultural employers. Next, this chart shows that the number of agricultural establishments in California remained constant after California's overtime provisions took effect. One of the principal claims that Cornell professors, one of whom you just heard from, Wolf, Strupp, and Karzes made in the report about overtime in New York, were dire claims that agricultural establishments in New York might be forced to close or will decide to move their operations to other US states because of higher labor costs associated with farm workers being entitled to overtime pay. But you should know that this definitely did not happen in California. The number of agricultural establishments in 2018, the year before California's overtime provisions took effect, was 16,812. In 2020, after the second year of the phase-in, the number of agricultural establishments had increased to 16,840, a small difference, but nevertheless going in the right direction. And while there was a small drop in the number of establishments between 2019 and 2020 of 26, preliminary data from the QCEW, the latest that we have available now, shows that in the second quarter of 2021, the number of establishments in California increased by a few hundred and stood at 17,088. Finally, just a few words about how the number of H-2A jobs certified in California has not declined during the overtime phase-in period, but instead has increased rapidly. This chart shows that the number of H-2A visas has increased across the United States dramatically, tripling since 2013. And the number in H-2A has also increased rapidly as part of that broader national trend. I should note that the H-2A program is deeply flawed and is in desperate need of reform because it relegates migrant farm workers to an indentured status where they have no ability to change employers, leaving them with few workplace rights in practice. Nevertheless, agribusiness representatives who use the program might claim that requiring employers to pay overtime to H-2A farm workers will increase their wages to such a high level that they'll end up being priced out of being able to afford paying the time and a half to H-2A farm workers earning the minimum H-2A rate known as the adverse effect wage rate, or AWER. I've seen that I'm out of time, so I'll just conclude by showing you this last chart that shows that the number of H-2A jobs certified in California has increased dramatically. Just 71% during the period in which California farm workers employed on farms with 26 or more workers have been eligible for it. I will submit written testimony with more details and citations, and I'm sorry, David, for going over.
Thanks, Daniel. That's great. I'm David Disregard Calic, and I'm Director of Immigration Research Initiative, a nonprofit nonpartisan center based here in New York, and I teach a class in regional economics at the Pratt Institute's Graduate School of Planning and the Environment. So Danielle Acosta told you a little bit about California. Let me say a little bit about our experience in New York. What we've seen as the state implemented the 60-hour overtime standard is right in line with what Maggie Gray, Olivia Heffernan, and I predicted in a 2019 report written for the Fiscal Policy Institute. Workers see less extreme overtime hours. Weekly pay is higher for workers, and farm owners can manage with the regulation despite their claims that they couldn't at the time. Some of them added workers to reduce the number of hours per worker. Some of them invested in farm equipment, as you heard from Professor Wolf, boosting productivity. Some of them found better management practices that could make more efficient use of workers' time. I'd like to just expand a little on the idea of productivity gains, since it's often underappreciated. There's undeniably some cost to farm owners when they're required to pay overtime, but it's not a dollar for dollar cost. The reason is increased productivity. As we've seen in many other instances, when employers are required to pay higher wages, they make a bigger effort to increase the efficiency of the workplace. We've seen it when minimum wage has been increased. We've seen it in unionized businesses, and we've seen it over the past year already in farms with the minimally binding 60-hour overtime threshold. What does an increase in productivity look like on farms? So farm owners may invest in equipment that makes work easier and faster for workers. That costs money in capital investment, but it also saves money in lower wages. That could be buying lifts for apple pickers or conveyor belts that reduce the amount of lifting and carrying. It could be gradually moving toward investing in advanced equipment that helps in milking. And it could be knowing what the rules are for, and knowing what the rules are for overtime in the future can provide a stable environment in which long-term investments make sense and can be amortized by the farm owners. Farm owners may also find ways to organize time and work in a way that's more effective, and paying overtime provides a real incentive to do that. Finally, overtime pay will reduce the cost of recruitment and training because it reduces turnover. I know that some farm owners and even some of the employees have questioned this idea, but I'm sorry, you just can't tell an economist that better wages will lead to fewer job applications. I was asked to talk a little bit about the report that you're also hearing about tonight from Professors Wolf, Stupp, and Karzis. I have to say, I'm a little surprised about how that study is being represented. In fact, the data that they report about past experience, the real data from 2019, is about the same picture as what we predicted in our report from 2019 and 2020. Strangely to me, the part of the Wolf, Stupp, and Karzis report that's getting more attention are some highly speculative and melodramatic claims about the future. So farm owners were asked what they would do if they had to meet a 40-hour overtime threshold. Unsurprisingly, many of the farm owners predicted disaster. It's fine to ask this question, but it's not right to suggest that the answer predicts how farm owners will actually respond. Econ 101 distinguishes clearly between stated preference and revealed preference, which is just a jargony way of saying people don't always do what they say they're going to do. Think about the surveys of workers who said they would quit if they were required to be vaccinated. And remember that farm owners just 2 years ago said that a 60-hour threshold would be catastrophic. Given that farm owners knew that they were essentially being asked if they could manage with a 40-hour overtime threshold, it's perhaps more surprising how many of them said they would be just fine. In fact, I think you've heard from some of those farm owners here as well. Those who want to do the right thing and might be better off if they were playing in a level playing field where other farm owners had to do the same. So let me just say this again. Yes, there's a cost to farm owners. And even if farm owners were going to absorb all of the cost, it would be a manageable share of their profits, as we showed in our 2019 report. But farm owners, like other good business, will not absorb all the cost. They'll invest in equipment and management practices that will increase worker productivity. And this will not only be better for workers, in the long run, it'll make New York's farm sector more competitive. Picture New York in 20 or 30 years. How will it be a stronger landscape? If farm owners can be competitive only with a business model that requires very long hours and low pay, or if they have a steady incentive to invest in better management, better equipment, and more sustainable labor conditions. I think the answer is obvious. The future of higher productivity is brighter for the entire farm sector, farm workers, farm owners, the communities they live in, and all of us who enjoy the local produce and New York's beautiful bucolic landscapes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for the panel?
No, just thank you for the presentation.
Agreed to 60 hours, and we said we would try to work with it. We did not, and that's we came to the table and agreed to that. Also, to clarify, there is not technology on a small scale that's affordable or economically feasible to make this work at this point. And that's one of the reasons we've said we need time. So thank you.
And yet what's been shown in the report that you're presenting is that the farm owners have in fact invested in technology that has increased productivity in this past year.
Any other questions from the board? Okay. Wonderful. With those three presentations concluded, we will now begin our testimony. And as the board had decided, our first presenter tonight is going to be Senator Jessica Ramos. Senator, we've set the clock for 3 minutes and you may begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Ramos, and I work as the state senator representing District 13, which includes Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, and parts of Astoria, Woodside, and Elmhurst. I chair the Senate Committee on Labor, and I'm a member of the Agriculture Committee. But above all, I am the proud daughter and granddaughter to farmers who've harvested coffee on the same lands in Colombia for hundreds of years. In 2019, I introduced and passed the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act that created this wage board. In my campaign for its passage, I visited dozens of farms in more than 8 counties and spoke to hundreds of workers and farmers throughout the state. On my tour, I learned about New York State's agriculture industry and about the backbreaking work farm workers do to plant and harvest our food. Tonight, I am calling on the wage board to create a path that lowers the farm worker overtime threshold so that they may receive the dignity and safety that they and all workers deserve. Overtime pay is a worker protection that was created under the FDR administration during the passage of the Fair Labor Practices Act 85 years ago. Unfortunately, farm workers and domestic workers, a largely Black workforce at the time, were excluded from the legislation to gain the support of racist Southern Dixiecrats. Implementing an overtime threshold means protection from long hours that lead to exhaustion and injury, and even tears into the fabric of our families. In fact, more than 100 years ago, the fight for the 40-hour work week was based on 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, and 8 hours of sleep to ensure workers are afforded a life that is whole. Lowering the overtime threshold for farm workers would increase the sustainability of this labor-intensive job, thus offering long-term financial security for them and their families. In a 2020 report, the New York Center for Agriculture, Medicine, and Health and the Northeast Center for Occupational Health and Safety found from 2009 to 2018 that 169 people were killed in agriculture injury events in New York State. That is more than twice the amount of police officers in any given year. While part of this can point to the need of the state to invest in safer equipment and regulations, it no doubt points to the amount of work that farmers and farm workers alike must do to survive. Several states have begun to implement a 40-hour threshold, as was mentioned earlier, so I won't dig too much into it. But Washington and New York are consistently in the top 5 biggest state producers of apples and milk, despite Washington's phased-in implementation of the 40-hour threshold. While California has started providing overtime at 40 hours for larger farms, Washington has implemented a phase-down starting in 2022, a 55-hour threshold, 2023, 48 hours, and 2024, 40 hours. There's no reason why here in New York we can't do even better than that. Just a few weeks ago, I actually had the opportunity to meet with New York's first unionized workforce at Pindar Vineyards in Peconic and Cutchogue in Suffolk County. All of the workers spoke of the need for enough time for proper rest needed to continue providing for their families. We must do right by these workers. They are not disposable, and farm work cannot be their only purpose in life. They are sons and daughters and parents, human beings who deserve time and pay that allows them a full life. I urge the Wage Board to finally put an end to our great state's discriminatory treatment of farm workers by phasing in a 40-hour overtime threshold like every other worker enjoys here in New York State. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the board? Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick reminder for everyone I know everyone is passionate and just a reminder to keep an eye on the timer and to speak slowly for our interpreters. Before we call the first or the next speaker, I'm just gonna go through the next group. Naya Thompson will be followed by Dale Heminger, Lisa Zucker, David Kalick, and Barbary Starowitz. But Naya Thompson, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Thank you, Chris. Madam Chair and members of the Farm Laborers Wage Board, my name is Naja Thompson. I am the Executive Director of the New York Thoroughbred Breeders. We are the official authorized representative of the thoroughbred breeding industry in New York State. And I am here to testify on all our members and all the members that are farm owners and horse breeders from New York's equine industry, the state's second largest agricultural business, to speak in support of keeping the 60-hour current overtime threshold. I know we've heard some talk tonight on the effects of positive gains that would be made by making a 40-hour work week, but I can tell you in the equine world, that would not be true. The technological advancements are not there, and what would be as a result of lowering the overtime threshold would be a drastic, considerable loss of jobs in the state and a closure of farms and family farms to the state of New York. As you know, I've mentioned the equine industry and the jobs that we create and the productivity that is made in the state under the current levels would be almost eliminated completely if we lower that overtime threshold. So if we could have the Farm Laborers Wage Board agree to look at this issue and continue to analyze things, I think following the COVID-19 pandemic, including inflation pricing, has affected all farmers in all areas of the agricultural industry. And so from the thoroughbred and equine industry perspective, we want to keep and monitor the situation with a current 60-hour overtime threshold. Of course, we all want to look out for workers and for them to progress, but to make a harsh and frankly, quick and swift change to a 40-hour work week would be devastating, at least into the equine industry. And I'm sure you'll hear other testimony tonight to other agricultural businesses in New York. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, our next speaker is going to be Dale Heminger. Dale, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Just to clarify, there was no notice of what order we were in. So I had no idea I was about to be out to a law just 3 minutes ago. And so here we go. Could you restart the timer, please?
Absolutely.
Okay. My name is Dale Heminger at Hemdale Farms and Greenhouses. I'm a farmer and a numbers guy. I have a 33-year-old son in the business, as well as a number of great longtime employees. First, I applaud the sincere and factual testimony of all my peers and those who truly participate in New York agriculture. Some of my employees have written and participated in videos, so I'm going to talk about the numbers. I joined the farm 45 years ago. We started growing cabbage for the sauerkraut industry that was brought to North America right here in my town, Phelps, New York, in the early 1900s. With the cabbage, we also grew red beets, carrots, snap beans, and sweet corn for Bird's Eye Foods and Seneca Foods. With that, folks, I facilitated a lot of jobs and careers with folks that became lifelong friends. Then 10 to 20 years ago, Birdseye sold all their New York vegetable plants and Seneca closed all but 2 of their New York plants. We had to stop growing all but the cabbage. With that, we shifted to fresh cabbage and got into the greenhouse vegetable plug plant business that was being 90% supplied by growers in Ontario, Canada. Canada has dominated the supply chain because of their lower labor cost, it was talked about last week, government-controlled cheap energy for heat, as well as subsidized investment in trucking. This past summer, we announced our original greenhouse manager, Joe Clement, was retiring after 18 years, and we hired a great guy, Jay Burgess. You can see him in the picture here, along with one of our 13 greenhouses. Jay came to us from a job overseeing supplies at an area hospital. He said he wanted a career that would support him to be able to buy his rented house, and work more hours was not an issue at all. With Jay on board, we would like to consider expanding the greenhouses to grow more vegetable plants for New York farmers that are all currently coming from Canada. I'd be happy to document that for you. Vegetable plugs can only go to 25 customers or our fields when it's not raining and the fields have dried out. The combination of the greenhouses and our cabbage production keeps us busy 20 or 30 hours a week when it's rainy, and 60 or 70 hours a week when its sun is shining. We have to go when we can work, and then we rest when we can't. My greenhouse customers have received the 22 pricing of the Canadian vegetable plugs. They're tough to compete with, and that is why they continue to supply most of the plants used in New York. If the overtime threshold is lowered, I'll have to make a number-based decision. My first draft suggests we would consider shutting down some or all the greenhouses to avoid this excess workload when things are perfect. Cabbage, just as I show you from the storage I got this afternoon, isn't sexy, but it's what we do. Lastly, I'd like to mention in the last 2 years, we've sold hundreds of thousands of pounds of cabbage to food banks, particularly because of the pandemic. You raise the overtime, we will not accept these loads because we can't afford to pay the labor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, our next speaker is going to be Lisa Zucker. Lisa, we will unmute you and you may start your testimony.
Thanks, Chris. My name is Lisa Zucker. I am a senior attorney for legislative affairs at the New York Civil Liberties Union. I am testifying in favor of lowering the overtime threshold. More than 85 years ago, New Yorkers enshrined in our state constitution the fundamental principle that, quote, the labor of human beings is not a commodity nor an article of commerce and shall never be so considered or construed. This provision was added to our Bill of Rights at a time when hundreds of thousands of men and women were being exploited in dangerous factories and sweatshops, working 50, 60, 70 plus hours a week, endangering their health and lives. So how can it be in 2022 that commerce is still being prioritized over labor conditions of farm workers? The same people whose work was deemed so essential that they continued to labor every single day during COVID when the rest of New York was put on pause. How can it be that their health and safety is worth less than virtually every other worker in our state? How can it be that farm workers are still excluded from basic overtime protection? The answer is simple and the answer is shameful. As you heard the history from Rebecca Dixon at NELP, the federal law upon which our state law was modeled is rooted in racism. No one is saying that individual farmers are racist, but the racist policy of excluding farm workers from equal overtime pay must end. Generations of farm owners have been allowed to create business plans that rely on the underpayment and overwork of farm workers. At some point, it must come to an end. After countless hours of testimony by farmers, one interesting theme has emerged in opposition to lowering the overtime threshold, that farm workers want to work more hours. Farm workers do not want increased hours. Like all workers, they want higher wages, safety protections, and reasonable work-life balance. This is not surprising. What is surprising is the belief by many owners that workers would gladly sacrifice their health, safety, personal, and family needs to earn those extra dollars. The NYCLU and others who have testified before this board are part of a large coalition of workers. and unions and allies. We represent literally hundreds of other workers. I myself have been meeting with this group for the past 4 years. We meet monthly, sometimes weekly. Our calls are in Spanish, often in Spanish, always translated, and workers know they can speak freely without fear of retaliation. The workers in our group live in or near the communities where they work, they pay taxes, they shop in local stores, and they raise families here. I just want to lift up something that Marcos, a dairy worker from Hamilton County, said last year in these hearings. Imagine if I work 40 normal hours and get paid for overtime beyond that. That would benefit my family perfectly. By working 40 hours, I'm working less for just pay, which is ultimately good for our bodies and health. Less burnout and injury with better pay. The law is incorrect if it does not change because we are sacrificing far more than they give us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you very much. I believe this might actually have been an error. David Kalick was signed up to present, but he just presented as the panelist. So I'm going to go next to Barbie Starowitz. Before we get to Barbie, I'm just going to go through the next set of names. Kira Kinney, Herb Engman, Fabiola Ortiz Valdez, Emma Krejci, and Richard Witt. But first, we will hear from Barbie Starowitz. We will unmute.
Hello.
Begin.
Hello, my name is Barbie Starowitz. My grandfather started farming here in Genesee County in 1932. Of 8 children, my father and 2 uncles continued farming. Next generation of 7 children, my 4 brothers and myself still work as farmers. We hope my nephews continue farming, but every year it gets harder to pay the bills and survive. My family is totally against lowering the threshold of a work hour week. Less than 60 hours will spell the end of growing certain crops. This action will force farms to choose. Do we grow only things harvested by machine, corn or soybeans? Face another increase to labor costs, less money to pay the bills. Some years we do not even break even. We do see increased costs to fertilizer, sprays, machine repairs, diesel to run the tractors, seed trucking, and so on. Farmers don't see an increase in price for their product. We only see the added expenses year after year. Farmers work side by side with their employees. Limiting their hours further, workers will be going to surrounding states. More hours, more money. We are at the mercy of extreme weather. In the years past, we turned dirt at the end of March or during April. In 2020, 2021, it wasn't until May. Limited growing season. Farmers are controlled by Mother Nature. Every growing day is a gamble, most too wet or too dry. Each New York county and every state is unique. We do not have California long growing seasons. Farmers plant or harvest from sun up till sundown during that limited window. When it rains, we're forced out of the field. We are at the mercy of the weather. You cannot put a limit on hours when weather is ideal. When it snows, we're not growing anything. With this added burden of overtime, you will see the loss of family farms. This will affect all sizes of farms. Farmers are getting tired of working so hard and barely making ends meet. Talk firsthand to all New York State farmers. Additional cost and restrictions of overtime will be detrimental. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, our next speaker is going to be Kira Kinney. Kira, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Okay, so I'm Kira Kinney. My farm is Evolutionary Organics. I sell primarily through the green market, farmers markets in New York City. What we've already adapted here to, or my adaptations to the 60-hour threshold, we no longer shoot for the moon on market days. The harvests are dialed in to avoid excess. And at the end of market day, where I used to be making weekly donations to food banks, I made one last season. And it was after a rainy market day, where any rainy market day, we lose a third to a half of the business. So that was the one time. There are 2 farms that remain at my market that make donations, and they're both farming in New Jersey. The next change that we made is worker hours are down. The guys took home about $3,000 less each this season. I'd allocate a half of that to the cut hours and a half to flooding. So when people want to compare ag to other industry, there's really nothing to compare to. My farm actually flooded twice this season. And when that happens, that's 100% loss of potential income. 100% of the expense that went into that potential income is also lost. There's no other industry in New York or anywhere else that faces these kinds of losses: floods, hail, early or late frost or freeze in dairy cut contracts. You've had farmer after farmer testify that if you implement a 40-hour week, ask us to behave like all other industry, that's exactly what we will do. An industry does not run on a 40-hour week plus 20 or more hours of overtime. The cuts won't be punishment. It's not a lack of respect for workers. It's farms being forced to act like all other industry. It's farms really fighting to keep farming. I run my farm with nearly 0 labor turnover, and I've never once let the men I work with down. We've talked about this. They want the 60-hour week. If we drop to 40, 4 out of the 6 guys I work with leave. Glass will stay because he has a green card and can get other work. PDO stays. He's my longest term employee at 18 years. He stays out of loyalty. But if I do right by him, I encourage him to go find better opportunities for himself and his family, as hard as that will be. So I'm asking you, the board, to temper your decision with who will this really help and what exactly does that help look like? The notion that workers are being sold false promises of increased earnings, I hope there's a plan on how to pick up the pieces of workers' lives when they end up earning less. We're here telling you, we are telling you what we will do. It is not necessarily what we want to do, but it's what we will have to do if a 40-hour week is implemented. Farming isn't the work for everyone, but it's the thing that if those of us choose it, we live it, we get it. And that choice is not just the farmers, it's a choice by those employees. So I implore you, settle it out and keep 60 at 60.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? David Fisher.
Kara, you talked about the green market, and there's a lot of interest in buy local, grow local. Can you explain your reasoning for that being a problem?
Oh, well, I mean, my green market, there's about half of those spaces go to farms that do not farm in New York. So their labor situations look entirely different. So those 2 big farms out of Jersey that are still making donations to food banks, you know, if this changed around in their state, those would likely drop off also. And for me to head out to any given market I do, like we do 2 a week, they're both on Saturday. It's $1,000 to attend one and $1,000 just out of the gate. It's $700 to go to the other. That's, you know, gas tolls, the rent at market, and the 3 or 4 people that are helping us there. You know, they're not expenses that are taken on lightly. And as much as like I can dictate in theory the price I set my products at, like the reality is with the competition from out-of-state farms taking up half of that marketplace, there is no allowing me to choose what I do and adjust the prices to cover things. I have to remain competitive there.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, thank you so much. Our next speaker is going to be Herb Engman. Herb, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
My name is Herb Engman, and I'm the retired director of the Cornell Migrant Farm Worker Program. As director over decades, I attended several meetings of the New York State Minimum Wage Advisory Council. Year after year, the council decided to keep farm worker wages below that of other New Yorkers. Finally, in the year 2000, Governor George Pataki got legislation passed equalizing the minimum wage for farm workers. I hope this body does not continue the shameful minimum wage legacy and allow the continued discrimination against farm workers, this time with a different, lower overtime standard. Agribusiness has said that equal overtime will bankrupt farms. That's what they said when equal minimum wage was passed, when drinking water was required in 1996, when access to toilets was required in 1998, and when the Farm Workers Fair Labor Practices Act was passed in 2019. The agricultural industry flourished. It did not die. The Cornell report recently released actually indicated that farmers had adjusted to the 60-hour overtime standard. Unfortunately, the report also stated that some farm workers would not continue to work in New York State if there were a 40-hour cap. I can assure you that they will be happy to continue to work in New York State when overtime is paid for all hours above the 40 standard. These resourceful farm managers will adapt to an equalized 40-hour standard. An older 1989 Cornell study concluded that, quote, the point is to eliminate agriculture's special treatment and to ensure that equal rights, protections, and obligations prevail for employees and employers across all sectors of the state's economy. If for no other reason, the state has a right to expect the farming industry to provide equal overtime pay because the federal and state governments provide support of approximately $400 million per year in subsidies, agricultural programs, and tax breaks. If the state government truly wants to support smaller farms, it should direct more of that aid to them, not to the large operations that now receive the lion's share of that money. The state should certainly not continue to build farm policy on the backs of farm workers. A 40-hour overtime is a matter of equal economic and civil rights for farm workers. I leave you with this thought. When does the economic prosperity of one person justify the exploitation of another? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, our next speaker is going to be Fabiola Ortiz Valdez. Fabiola, we will unmute you and you may start.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, and thank you to the board for hearing testimonies today. My name is Fabiola Ortiz Valdez. I am the lead organizer of the Food Chain Workers Alliance. We are a member-based organization that organizes with workers in the food chain in the US and in Canada. Myself and all of our members and allies, especially in New York, are in support of lowering the overtime threshold to 40 hours. I've had the privilege of organizing with farm workers, especially dairy workers in New York, for 10 years. And I have witnessed the ways in which workers have organized without any protections against low wages, amongst other issues. By passing the FLFPA, New York took a very important step in the right direction, so workers continued to organize. And many have given testimony in this audience as personally, and many more have entrusted the organizers and allies to give their message. So my testimony and the testimony of many of my colleagues reflect what many workers who for several reasons are not able to be here are asking from this wage board, which is to lower the overtime threshold to 40 hours. We have heard about the cost of increasing the overtime wages. However, the agriculture industry has benefited economically from not paying overtime or providing a day off to farm workers. As we heard before, the reason that farm workers were excluded from these basic labor protections in the first place was because of a racist decision made to exclude Black workers from basic labor rights. So the issue is not if employers and employees have a good relationship, which is something that we heard a lot. This is not a matter of farmers having ill will against workers. To echo what somebody mentioned earlier, the lack of just pay to farm workers is a structural problem. We know that many farmers, as we have heard too, are not in charge of how much they charge for the products and that some farms are suffering. But the agriculture industry or any other industry should not get ahead on the backs of workers, not anymore. We also heard the argument that if farmers cut hours, then workers will leave. But the issue there is not that people want to overwork themselves. The issue is that they want better pay. Workers want to support themselves and their families and also have time for family and friends without having to work themselves to the bone. Farm workers are essential workers who have worked and continue to work every day during the pandemic. Just a few days ago, when winter bans were in place, record low temperatures were hitting in our country. Dairy workers continued to work for some over 40 hours, risking their health and their lives to put food on our tables. Farm workers, especially undocumented workers, deserve their right to fair overtime because our collective health depends on their safety and their well-being. The issue of overtime pay should not be looked into in a vacuum and in isolation from other problems, especially those of undocumented farm workers are facing working in the state and in this country. And although we cannot fix everything, this board has the opportunity to make one thing right. So thank you to the board for welcoming mine and others' testimony, urging you to lower the threshold to 40 hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you. Emma Krejci is going to be our next speaker. Emma, I see you on here twice, so we'll try to unmute the right one, but just give us a second if we don't unmute the right one. You should be unmuted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was on my phone as well.
All good, we can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on behalf of the Worker Justice Center of New York. For 40 years, Worker Justice Center has been working to defend and advance the rights of farm workers in our state through legal assistance and policy advocacy. This year alone, we visited nearly 250 farm worker housing sites and spoke directly with over 2,500 farm workers. I personally have worked with farm workers for 20 years and have borne witness to the impact that long work hours have on their bodies, mental health, families, opportunities for self-expression and engagement in community life. I wish it weren't necessary to state the obvious. Farm workers are not machines. They are people made of flesh and blood, not built to labor from morning to night, day in and day out. If there's one lesson to glean from this pandemic, it's that those who compromise their health, safety, and well-being to keep our essential industries going deserve dignity and respect. That includes receiving fair compensation for their labor. Now, we've heard that farm workers will flee New York in search of work where there are no overtime, quote unquote, restrictions, including places like Pennsylvania. And as has already been pointed out, the minimum wage in Pennsylvania is just $7.25. That means a dairy farm worker, for example, would have to work 33 hours of overtime in Pennsylvania to earn the exact same amount as they would earn in New York working a 40-hour week. It's not clear to me how it's in their self-interest to leave New York. Also, this idea that overtime protections will lead to a shortage of foreign guest workers to fill job openings in New York State is simply ludicrous. Sadly, due to lack of economic opportunities in their home countries, we know that there is effectively an endless supply of seasonal foreign labor accessible to New York's ag industry via the H-2A program. And that's regardless of whether they're contracted to work 40 hours or 60. But global economic inequities are not a justification for continued exploitation. So let's be very clear. Nobody wants to work 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week performing hard manual labor. What people want is to earn a living, feed their families, and live with dignity. Suggesting otherwise is frankly demeaning. And throughout these proceedings, I've been especially appalled by the employers who've obviously misrepresented this issue to their employees, making it seem as though we're trying to limit the number of hours they are permitted to work rather than raise their wages for overtime hours. And then they trot them out in front of the camera to testify that they don't want their hours cut because they need the income. This is just a manipulative and disingenuous tactic. I don't think I'm alone among proponents of a 40-hour work week when I say I would wholeheartedly support any legislation or appropriations aimed at strengthening the viability of an equitable and sustainable ag sector. As these hearings demonstrate so clearly, New York's farm employers are more than capable of organizing themselves and advocating on behalf of their industry. I'm wrapping up. I would just love to see these powerful efforts leveraged toward enacting policy solutions that don't rely on the continued exploitation of Black and brown immigrants and foreign-born guest workers. Surely there's a way forward that can lift all boats.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Richard Witt, after which I'll read through the next set of names is Eric Ohms, Kim Skelly, Maureen Torrey, Daniel Albender, and Gail Hepworth. And Gail, just for those wondering, is number 15. So that's where we are on the list. But right now we'll begin with Reverend Witt. We will unmute you and you may begin.
Thank you to the board for your deliberations. My name is Richard Witt. I'm the Executive Director of Rural and Migrant Ministry, a statewide organization located in the farming regions of New York and representing 13 faith bodies, several thousand congregations, and in partnership with the New York State AFL-CIO, UFCW, RWDSU, and NYSUT. I have been a part of the journey for equal treatment of farm workers for over 30 years. And there are two observations that I hold before the Wage Board. One, the campaign has always been about equality and the importance of treating those who labor to feed us with justice and dignity. The legislature passed the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act because they agreed that it was time, after all these hundreds of years, to treat farm workers equally and to have a just food system. Throughout the Justice for Farm Workers campaign, farm workers risked their jobs and their safety through marching for hundreds of miles, countless legislative visits and vigils, and a willingness to speak to anyone who would listen, all with the simple request, treat us with dignity, treat us equally. I have also listened to the hardworking farmers in the Farm Bureau repeatedly say throughout these 30 years, and in fact, farmers have been saying this for hundreds of years before my time, we cannot afford to have a system change. We cannot afford, what I hear, a just system. Time and time again, it has been about economics. As New Yorkers, we cannot have an economic system that is based on injustice. There is no reason, no moral justification to treat agricultural differently. We need to achieve equality first. In turn, it seems to me that with the creative power of New Yorkers, and specifically our land-grant University Cornell, and the sharp folk in the labor and ag departments of the state, we can figure out a creative solution to make agriculture work for all of us, farm worker and farmer. Which leads me to another thought. I see the governor is offering a creative pathway, a subsidy for farmers who are paying overtime. It would seem to me that this pathway addresses ag businesses' concern, and in turn, there can be no further objection except one that is based on racism and a lack of appreciation of humanity. It is time to complete the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act and create a pathway that lowers the threshold of 60 to 40 hours for the men, women, and children who toil in our vineyards. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Okay. Our next speaker is going to be Eric Ohms. Eric, we will unmute you and you may start.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks to the board for taking the time to listen. And Chris, you do a tremendous job because it's really a hard job. You should do this for a living. My name is Eric Ohms. I'm a dairy farmer from Kinderhook, just south of Albany. My parents immigrated here from the Netherlands in the 1950s. I can trace dairy in my family back to 1525 that we know of. So it's who we are, it's what we do. For most of my adult life, I've been involved. And before I get to my next thing, as a farmer, I'm not going to tell my farm story. I'm going to tell a different story. But before we get to that, I'm 47 years old. In my adult life, there's never been a time where anyone has asked for time off that we haven't given it to them. If people say I want to work 32, we have people working between 32 and 56. We've had kids who want to work 70. We've let them work 70. We've never let anybody work 7 days. But we had a kid who was in his 20s and he wanted to work a lot. Great. You know, that was his choice. No one forced him. But in another role, I'm the vice president of New York Farm Bureau. My father took me to the state legislature when I was 17 years old to lobby for farm issues. And I was hooked. So I've been involved in farm policy for the last 30 years, and I've never seen the outpouring of concern. I guess the wage board and the legislature has done one thing that's really, really positive from my perspective, is it has incentivized farmers to get involved in civics. I've never seen people that I never heard of speak out at these types of forums. And they're doing it because they're concerned. And I have calluses on my hands. I work today with my brothers and employees. We all work together. And I've done this my whole life. And the reason people are saying this is because people are going to change what they're doing. I don't care what bureaucrats say. They can have all the theory they want. That's just how it's going to be. If we want fresh fruit and vegetables in this state, we're going to have to find a nuanced way to deal with this. There's a lot of emotion around this because we have a lot of family ties that go back generations. And I will say, it's a different experience. I listened to the whole second one and I viewed a lot of the first one, but watching this, for me now, it's deeply disturbing to be called racist. I don't know how to even respond to that. We have nothing but respect for the people we work with. And for those that say employees are not respected and not taken care of, what are you doing about that? Because frankly, there's lots of opportunity for people. But again, I thank you guys for taking the time to listen to us and hear us out. And I hope you'll find a nuanced way to deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Eric? Okay, our next speaker is going to be Kim Skelly. Kim, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. I just want to clarify one thing. Twice Pennsylvania has been brought up as a $7.25 minimum wage. People do not pay people $7.25 in Pennsylvania because New York is next door, Maryland's next door. They pay them much more than that. So that comparison is just ridiculous. But I'll move on. I'm a dairy farmer in the Finger Lakes region. We milk 2,000 cows and crop 3,500 acres and employ 32 full-time people. And obviously I'm advocating to keep the threshold at 60 hours. It's one thing to set a threshold of 60 hours to help limit excessive workloads. It's a whole different ballgame to restrict individual income by lowering the threshold to 40 or anywhere near 40. On a December webinar on labor management, the speaker stated that non-agricultural industries paid on average 5% of their hours at an overtime rate. Ironically, at our farm in 2020, we restricted hours to 60 for those who wanted to work more than 60. 6 months later, after frustration had built due to lower income, we had some turnover. Eventually, we settled on about 5% overtime hours, just like other industries. And just like other industries, we will strive to limit overtime every week, every month, because we have to stay competitive in a business where we don't set our sell price, but can control costs. Larger, more profitable businesses in other industries limit hours because it is bad business not to, and so we will. I want to switch gears to something a little more positive. During the January 4th hearing, some ag labor statistics were presented without qualifying them. They show that the average farm worker in New York was paid $39,950 in annual wages with no explanation. This likely blends full-time, part-time, seasonal, and year-round work together. The information is misleading. We're a pretty standard modern dairy farm in New York State. We pay about the same as all of our neighbors to prevent turnover. And in 2021, our newest, lowest paid employee made over $45,000 in wages, not including benefits. That's a 20-something young man with no education who's earning more than most starting teachers in upstate New York. Everyone else at the farm earns more than him, with most between 50 and 70,000. We offer all the standard benefits of paid vacation, health insurance, simple IRA matching, housing, holiday overtime. We've done COVID vaccine clinics, flu shot clinics. Everybody gets a day off or 2 days off every week. So I think our crew has a pretty good life. And I think that there's a lot of misrepresentation here about the majority of farms in New York. I think we are a little more than the norm. Please leave the threshold at 60 hours. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the board? Okay, we will go next to our next speaker is Maureen Torrey. I believe Maureen, who's labeled on here, is Maureen Torrey.
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect, great. We will, you may begin. Thanks, Maureen.
Good evening and thank you, Chairman McDuffie, Mr. Hughes, and Mr. Fisher. I'm Maureen Torrey, part of a family farm located in Western New York. Fresh market processing and storage vegetables, grain, dairy, and transportation operation. Our farm team members have asked me to speak tonight for them. Many of them have strongly spoken out or written letters and want 60 hours or more. Of our year-round employees, many are first generation or grew up on a farm and want to buy homes and send their children for higher education. They are money smart and know 40 hours will not make it possible for them to achieve their dreams. They also understand the demands and needs of farming. The crops need to be harvested when ripe or bad weather is coming. The cows milked and fed 24/7. Financially, they know how they and their families are going to be hurt tremendously. Our year-round employers at our lowest paid level at 60 hours now are earning approximately $48,859 a year plus benefits, which include free housing at no charge and utilities, 401ks, health insurance, vacation time. They will lose $16,286 in yearly income, plus less in the employer contribution to their 401k. Approximately 33% cut in pay.
Maureen, you may have frozen. Thank you for pausing the clock too. That's all right. We'll give Maureen a second to see if she can reconnect. In the meantime, we will move on. Two additional individuals up next I don't see on here. If you are here, if you could click raise hand, is Daniel Albender and Gail Hepworth. I do not see you. The next group after that is going to be Quade Kirk, Helen Dombrowski, Megan Hauser, Daniel Schumacher, and Miles Perry. So Quade is going to be the next speaker. And Quade, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Good evening. My name is Quade Kirk, and I am appealing to you tonight on behalf of young dairy farmers throughout the state to please keep the overtime threshold at 60 hours. I am a 28-year-old first-generation dairy farmer with a very unique perspective on this issue because I have been an employee in dairy production on multiple farms during my entire life. But now I also have the perspective from a farm ownership position. I am currently working towards being an owner of Dutch Hollow Farms in Columbia County, New York, just a couple minutes south of Albany. It's a multi-generational family farm where I'm working into partnership with my wife and 7 other family members. The team on our farm consists of 3 generations of my wife's family, as well as nine full-time non-family employees and a handful of part-time employees. We pride ourselves on being a preferred place to work. We have 2 brothers that help us part-time that are 3rd generation in their family to work at our farm. 6 out of 7 employees on our milking crew have been with us at least 2.5 years, with some as long as 15 years. The most turnover comes from Hispanic employees that leave to return home to their native countries, and nearly every time they have arranged for a family or friend to replace them in their position before they leave, and have even helped train them before their departure. Both employees and owners at Dutch Hollow Farm work long hours side by side. For example, my father-in-law and I are responsible for the well-being and care of the cows on the farm. We regularly work 12 to 14 hours and make sure they are well taken care of. We frequently get calls all hours of the night. We're on call quite literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are few professions where that is the case. This is something that our employees understand comes with the nature of the job. As milk producers, we are in a commodity business where we are price takers, not price makers. We do not set the price for what we receive for our milk, so we are unable to pass that cost along to our consumers, and our input costs lately have increased. Almost every input on the farm has increased in price. For example, only our grain bill to our feed company, which is the single largest cost on our farm, has increased 27.8% annually from 2020 to 2021. Labor, which is the second largest cost on our farm and many dairy farms, our wages paid increased 13.5% from 2020 to 2021 due to just the minimum wage alone. Further changes to the overtime threshold will continue to increase the farm's labor costs and make small margins even tighter, with no way to increase the amount we are paid for the products we produce. Another consequence that will specifically hit our farm hard, as well as many other farms in Eastern New York, is our proximity to other states. We are 30 minutes from the Massachusetts border and less than an hour from Connecticut and Vermont. These are all places with agriculture employment opportunities. And if we can't provide sufficient hours to our employees, we risk them leaving to go to these other states. In conclusion, in order to maintain the diverse fabric of rural New York, we must keep family farms operational and competitive on a national level. Lowering the overtime threshold from 60 hours would hurt many family businesses and discourage young farmers like myself from farming in New York State. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Quade? All right, and we've not forgotten about Maureen. We've been trying to find her, but we will circle back. Our next speaker is going to be, I believe it's Elaine Dombrowski. So I apologize if I butchered that for you. We've unmuted you and you may begin. Okay. Are you Dombrowski? Are you not Elaine or Helen? Oh wait, we can't hear you if you're trying to speak. That's okay. I'm not sure if you're having an audio trouble. Why don't we go to next speaker and we will circle back to you. Megan Hauser. I don't see here. If you're here, click raise hand. Also, Daniel Schumacher. I don't see on here. Miles Perry. I also don't see on here. So the next group after that is going to be Edgar Hernandez, Robert Nolan, Bill Zalacker, Kelly Rabi, and Sarah Noble Moog. So Edgar, I'm not sure you're on. I don't see you here. Robert Nolan, I do see. So Robert, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
My name is Robert Nolan. I'm a fourth generation vegetable farmer on Long Island. Along with my wife, Janet, my daughter, Valerie, and my son, Samuel, we farm 30 acres of labor-intensive vegetables like lettuce, spinach, and herbs, just to name a few. I'm here to say that the overtime threshold must remain at 60 hours. I have 6 H-2A workers from Mexico, and they are the best gentlemen you will ever meet, hardworking and caring about their job. They arrive at my farm in mid-April and return to Mexico in November. All of their expenses to bring them here are paid by me. At the height of my season, we work 70+ hours. I'm already paying 10 hours of overtime per week currently. I can't afford to pay 30 hours of overtime if the threshold is lowered. The economics just don't work. And I can't just raise my prices as I am competing with other states and countries. My workers are all married and their families are in Mexico. They don't want to sit around the house while they are here. They want to work. The more hours, the better. They send their money home to feed and take care of their families. We have managed to adjust to a 60-hour work week, especially in the busy season. The 60-hour overtime threshold was a compromise that was agreed upon by both sides. A deal is a deal, or is it? No sooner did the overtime law take effect than we were hearing about a wage board to study if the threshold could be lowered to 40. Are you kidding me? I hadn't even hired any workers and there were hearings being scheduled. Where is the time to study the data? We need years of data to see if the industry can sustain anything less than 60 hours. And I'm here to tell you that it can't. But let's wait for the data to see if I'm correct. When the pandemic hit, the elected officials turned to the farmers of the state for food, and we answered the call, no questions asked. Along with my fellow upstate farmers who sent milk, cheese, and other items, I sent in spinach several times to Senator Jessica Ramos's district. The farmers were there when you needed us. If the overtime threshold gets lowered, some of those farmers won't be around the next time a food crisis hits. And the question will be asked, where did all the farmers go? Where was all the food we used to produce in this state? The answer will be it comes from other states and other countries like Canada and Mexico. Do we really want to rely on other people for our food? What if a drought hits those areas and there is a food shortage? Then what will we do? New York is blessed with abundant farmland, and the key factor, we have the water to grow the crops where other areas don't. I took over the farm from my uncle in 2001, and he told me that I would always be able to grow crops on the land. Taking care of the land with compost, cover crops, and other practices, the vegetables will always grow. But he said to me, and I quote, "I am afraid you're going to be regulated out of business," end quote. And here we are today on the brink of being regulated out of business by an overtime law that the vast majority of farm workers don't agree with. I'm asking you to leave the overtime threshold at 60 hours. 60 means 60. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, seeing none. Daniel, we do see you. We will circle back. Helene, we see you. We're going to try to unmute you and try that again. If you're able.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yep.
Okay, great. My name is Helene Dombrowski. I'm a second generation apple farmer located in the Hudson Valley region of New York State. We have 22 full-time workers, which are all housed on the farm. We pay for the housing, and the workers are not required to pay for any expenses or living expenses that they need to live. We have 60 seasonal workers that come to do the harvest and the maintenance of the orchards, plus we hire an additional 30 workers for packing of the apples. We have a 350-acre farm, which provides many foods for Nourish New York programs and school lunch programs. I've crunched the numbers. If the overtime were to be lowered to the 40 hours, it would cost us an additional $194,000 for harvest, an additional $185,724 for spring and summer work. The winter work would cost us an additional $20,000. Packing would cost us an additional $32,175. In total, it would cost us an additional $431,979 per year to absorb this change. I urge you to please keep the 60-hour overtime threshold, as this satisfies the workers. I'm fluent in Spanish, and I've had multiple conversations with my workers, and they are happy the way it is. Our workers that have been here, on average, are full-time, have been here greater than 15 to 20 years. They are comfortable here. This is their home. Their families are here. They like nothing more than to have a secure place, especially in this unsecure economy. With all the additional expenses of COVID, inflation, fuel, and everything else, we cannot afford an additional expense at this time. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Dennis, do you have a question? No, you don't. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for that. And we're now going to go to Daniel. I believe Daniel, and there's Edgar as well. I think you're Daniel. So we'll unmute you and you may begin.
All right. Good afternoon or good night. Please keep the overtime threshold at 60 hours. My name is Daniel Shoemaker. I'm a second generation farmer in the town of Naples in Ontario County. We currently employ 48 people. Many have worked here a long time, some upwards of 25 years. You'll be speaking with Edgar Hernandez. He's worked here for over 15 years. Most people that work here are referrals from other employees or their families. We have never advertised for help, at least in the last 10 years. The costs of doing business are continually on the rise. The cost of labor has increased dramatically for us since we needed to add many more employees when the 60-hour threshold was implemented in 2019. The cost for us was increased housing and cost in training employees when they did end up leaving, when their hours got cut from 72, 75 hours a week. And they were unhappy with that to the 60 hours. We do not have control over the milk price. It is kind of set at a federal level, and we cannot pass the cost on to our consumers like many other industries, like construction was one example given here tonight. We got paid more for our milk in 2007 than we did last year. In the same year, minimum wage was $7.15 in New York State. Payroll expenses are the highest expense on, or the second highest expense on our farm, second to feed costs. If you continue down this road, more and more farms will adopt robotics to milk cows, reducing the amount of labor needed on farms. So essentially, you're going to be hurting the people that you're trying to help, and or just leave the state altogether. Farming is also different than many other sectors because we are out there working right along with employees every day with our livestock 24/7. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and address some of the stuff I've heard tonight. You'll see listening to lawmakers and workers' rights testimonies, you'll find a common theme here. Farmers and farm workers are in vast majority against reducing the 60-hour work week, while activists, lawyers, people in ties and suits, lawmakers, people that have nothing to do with production, farm production in the state, are bent on shoving these laws down our throats. To the activists promising our farm workers will just pay the time and a half like California did. There was one slide here shown tonight how California farms are only paying 1 to 2 hours of overtime a week. That's not going to cut it here. We have many regulations here in New York. It's a very tough place to do business, and this will just be one more thing to help drive farmers and people in agriculture out of this state. Again, please continue to keep an overtime threshold at 60 hours in order for our business to survive in the state of New York.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the board? Okay. Daniel, just a quick question. Did you say you had Edgar with you?
Yeah, Edgar's right here. You can jump on now if you like.
He's next on the list, so we will reset the timer.
Hola, mi nombre es Edgar Hernández. He trabajado para Daniel Shoemaker durante 15 años. Y me gustaría que mantuvieran el horario de trabajo que es de 60 horas semanal. No me gustaría que lo redujeran a 40. Me gusta trabajar aquí, me gusta el trabajo con las vacas. Tengo 2 hijas, una más que viene en camino. Y si ustedes redujeran a 40 horas, sería difícil darle una muy buena estabilidad.
Is there a translator that's going to jump on here, or how is that done? Is there someone to translate English to Spanish or Spanish to English?
They are.
Okay.
Creo que si bajaran las horas, eso enojaría mucho en lo personal a mí y a muchos empleados que tenemos demasiado tiempo aquí. Porque entonces no le podremos brindar a nuestras familias una comodidad buena como la que tenemos ahorita. Aparte de todo esto, me gusta trabajar en esta granja. Llevo muchos años aquí. Sería difícil que para nosotros o para la familia asimilar que tendríamos que trabajar 40 horas. Amo el trabajo de rancho, amo trabajar aquí. Los patrones son demasiado buenos con nosotros, valoran nuestras opiniones. También, aparte de eso, nosotros recibimos alojamiento y tiempo de vacaciones. Tengo más familiares que trabajan en otras granjas que, al igual que yo, estamos un poco en desacuerdo con que se nos quiten horas. Tengo una vida hecha aquí, tengo mi familia, tengo mis hijos, el tiempo que nos queda libre, vamos a visitar a familiares o vamos a visitar a familiares o nos reunimos con otras personas, ¿no? de otras granjas. Y además participamos en las iglesias de aquí, tenemos nuestros hijos asisten a campeonatos de fútbol.
Skip down to the last bit. Just skip down to the last.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the board for Edgar? Okay, I do see that Megan Hauser is with us. Megan, we will unmute you if you are there and you may begin.
Hi, my name is Megan Hauser. I just am stepping out of the milking parlor, so it's going to take me a minute here.
Everything okay?
Well, I don't see it would be that we have a dairy farm in Western New York. We employ 35 people, full and part-time. They're talented, they're wonderful individuals. We believe in paying them fairly. We believe in overtime as well. We've been paying overtime of some form since the 1970s on our farm. My concern with dropping overtime from 60 hours to 40 hours would be that we're not on a level playing field. States near us have a lower, make us less competitive when we have a higher wage. We also have higher other associated payroll costs, which makes us again less competitive. And my key point would be that would be great if we waited until the federal government got to the point of declaring a national overtime hourly number so that we could all be on the same playing field. We enjoy dairying. We want to do our very best. Our employees want to do their very best. And we'd like to continue dairying. It's if New York State decides to make a change to 40 hours, that's going to be very difficult for us to continue. So thank you. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Megan. Are there any questions for Megan? Okay, seeing none, appreciate that. We're going to go to our next speaker, who we see is Bill Zalacker. Bill, we will unmute you and you may start your testimony.
Good evening, members of the Wage Board. My name is Bill Zalakar, and I'm the general manager of a greenhouse company. First, I have to say that I am truly appalled by some of the remarks concerning worker exploitation and the people making these remarks. If there is such a problem, then it is your obligation to bring that to the attention of Department of Labor or other regulatory agencies. Shame on any of you that are going to stereotype an entire group of people over the doings of a few. Step up and take accountability. The recommendation that you must make comes down to economics. The numbers are clearly there to substantiate this, as shown in the reports from Farm Credit East and Cornell University. As a business manager, I have seen the shift in the past year with the threshold being set at 60 hours. Workers are getting less hours. The workers are picking up a second job instead of the convenience and safety of staying with one job. It will happen even more if the threshold is lowered. Is this what you want for farm workers, to make it harder for them to make a living? I started in agriculture at minimum wage because I chose to. There were never locks on the gates keeping me locked into this job, as well as any of the workers out there today. It is our choice to stay or go. Many of my fellow workers have made a better life regardless of color or ethnicity. I am troubled at the comparison of our farms today to the Jim Crow era. When I was young, most of the migrant workforce was from Europe. Our farms also have made changes to support our employees, providing better and safer working conditions and higher wages, as the testimonies have proven. Let's not stereotype all of New York agriculture. Regarding the decision at hand, we all agree that the Farm Worker Fair Labor Law that was passed has brought many changes to an industry that is unique and diverse. Both sides agreed on a decision, and that's what it should be. My recommendation is to keep the overtime threshold at 60. With the new law in place, any farm workers that are not happy have the right to organize a union, such as we've seen on Long Island here. At the same time, they may use the collective bargaining process to negotiate the lowering of the overtime threshold for their employment hours if they so desire to. Use the proper procedures at hand and do not attempt to destroy an entire industry by a rash general decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board members? Okay, we're next going to go, I don't see Kelly Robbie on. If she's here, if she could raise her hand. We are then going to go next to Sarah Nobel Mogg. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name there. And just a quick note that after Sarah goes, we are going to take a 10-minute break. Before we do that, I'll read the next group of names for us to return. But Sarah will unmute you and you may begin.
Thanks, Chris. Would you mind sharing my screen? Chris?
There you go. I just enabled it for you.
I'm a 6th generation farm worker in Livingston County, and our family farm, our dairy business, Noblehurst.
I just want to interrupt. If you have to hit share screen, I just enabled it. You just need to click share screen.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. I'm not real good at this.
No, all good.
Hey, there we go. Okay.
Let's see, hold on. I'm still not seeing. Did you hit share screen down in the menu?
Yes, I did. I'll do it again.
I am not seeing anything.
Hang on. How about that?
Still not.
All right. Okay. I'm just going to talk.
Okay.
You guys are missing some great pictures. Can I just say that? I have pictures of our employees of all sorts. But anyway, I am a 6th generation farm worker, and our farm includes 3,300 animals and 3,200 acres. And I work alongside of 36 employees who make great milk and take a wonderful care of our animals. But our farm isn't solely about crops and cows. It's about people, empowering them to meet their potential with opportunity for earnings and advancement. Understand, though, we have to stay in business to do so. I've listened to previous testimony, hearing some passionate, subjective opinions about how to run our business. Representing Noblehurst, I asked the wage board to study this decision objectively and maintain the overtime threshold at 60 hours. As a farm worker myself, I work together with individuals that I wanted to show you a picture of, hardworking folks, blind to ethnicity, age, ability, and gender. Our farm welcomes local and foreign-born employees, and we have met those families in their home country and developed a deep understanding of the hardships they face and within our own rural community as well. The wages earned at Noblehurst purchase family necessities such as healthcare and education, housing, and emergencies, whether they're in Chiapas or in Geneseo. And we personally have witnessed the power of those remittances and have a huge respect for the impact they make. 15 of our employees are owners of Noblehurst. Our entire team is in the barns, fields, and tractors every day. We strive to be fair and hold one accountable. Farming is hard work and is a lifestyle we have chosen. And I would ask the wage board to remember, as an industry, we do not employ slave labor. We consciously follow all state and federal regulations And I would encourage folks who disagree with the hard work to apply at Target. Beginning in 2019 with the overtime change, our payroll increased by 8%. If it goes to 40, it will go to 12%, which equates to about $4,000 a week, over $200,000 a year. Not sure where our employees are going to do after that or how they'll support their families. We're carefully investing in our community and in our next generation. We continue to seek out efficiencies, but we can't cut store hours. We can't close a few days a week. We're open 24/7, feeding New York and beyond. Please consider the unintended consequences, which will no doubt cripple our rural economies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the board for Sarah? Okay, we are going to now take a 10-minute break. When we return, the next 10 speakers will be, and starting with number 26, Scott Wexler, Stuart Ziem, David Bittner, Elena Varvalakis, William Forens, Karen Kudik, Sarah Head, Jonathan Patterson, Thomas O'Mara, and David Ritchie. So we'll now pause for a 10-minute break and see you at 7:10. Thank you. And welcome back, everyone. Appreciate you being here. I do see Maureen Torrey. Maureen, we'll circle back with you in just a second. I didn't want to blindside you, but we do want to finish your testimony because I know you were cut off. But we are going to continue next. I need to unmute our interpreters. I apologize. Welcome back again. Scott Wexler is going to be our next speaker. Scott, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon. I'm Scott Wexler, Executive Director of the Empire State Restaurant and Tavern Association. The association is a grassroots organization representing New York State's on-premise beverage alcohol licensees. I'm here today on behalf of our members to express our opposition to any change in the overtime rules for farm workers. Our members care about this issue because of the vital role farmers play in the food supply chain. Any impacts on farmers will have a direct and immediate impact on our members' businesses. You heard earlier today about the Cornell University study that examined the impact of the overtime rule on New York farmers. This impact on New York farms will trickle down to our members in the form of increased food costs and disruptions to the food supply chain. That's a reasonable expectation if past experience is any guide. It's hard to quantify the disruptions in the food supply chain, but as a result of the COVID-19 impacts on supply chains, this is no longer an abstract concept. Labor shortages throughout the supply chain have made keeping restaurant pantries stocked a real challenge. Food cost inflation is something we can quantify. According to a recent report from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the index for food away from home rose 5.8% over the last year, the largest 12-month increase since January 1982. The increased costs on restaurants have been passed along to New York's consumers. This will only get worse if additional labor costs are imposed on New York's farms. We think the New York Farm Bureau and the many independent farmers you've heard from at these hearings make a lot of sense. Our members stand with New York farms in opposing a change in the overtime rules that would so clearly impact pain on so many. New Yorkers do not need any more inflationary pressures to drive up prices, and New York's restaurants don't need another barrier to their survival. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Scott from the board? Okay, wonderful. Maureen, as promised, we're going to unmute you and you may finish your thought. I heard your internet was cut.
Yes, and everything. part of living in the country.
Understood. No.
I'm not quite sure how far I got, but where I would like to start again is financially is how our employees are going to be hurt. Our year-round employees, the lowest paid level at 60 hours now are earning approximately $48,859 a year plus benefits, which include housing and utilities at no charge, 401ks, vacation pay. They will lose $16,286 in yearly income, plus less than employer contribution to their 401k. They're looking at approximately a 33% cut in pay. Our seasonal H-2A visa employers average 16 hours, which equate to $15,033. They will see that decrease by over $5,000. For many of them, this is their only employment for the year. Many live in rural communities and there's no employment opportunities, or if they find employment is only about $15 a day for 10 hours. Our workers understand marketing. If the harvest wagons of vegetables are full and someone is selling cheaper, they see Canadian and Mexican vegetables in the grocery store. They know at home in Mexico, their pay would only be about $15 a day. They help fill tractor trailers of vegetables every day to compete in the global marketplace. Our workers are worried of what's going to happen to their dreams that they have for their children and their families back in their country and here in the United States. I touched upon California and Washington. New York State, we have one growing season where California has 2 to 3. They don't have the data of going to 40 hours yet because large farms with 26 or more employees just started January 1st of 2022, and the smaller farmers with 25 or less doesn't start till January 1st of 2025. Washington doesn't start until 2022. Thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of my farm team.
Any questions for Maureen from the board? David, do you have a question?
I just want to let Maureen finish the California story, and I'd like her to speak to what she mentioned with Canada and the markets and how it affects our business, especially fruits and vegetables in New York.
Okay. With California, and working with our peers and talking that grow many of the same crops, they have started moving their growing operations to Mexico. And these are names that you recognize in the grocery store. They're also changing the type of crops that they're growing. They're also not quite sure how this much is going to affect them, and because they haven't had 40 hours yet. It just started 20 days ago, and that's why New York needs to put a pause on and see what happens in these other states, because we don't even have the data of what the 60 hours has done in our state. Our market area, when New York State vegetable growers are in season, approximately 20 other states are local, plus both Canada and Mexico. Hunts Point Market in the Bronx is the world's largest wholesale terminal. We are, out of those 20 states that we are competing against in 2 countries, we currently are the only states with overtime and the highest pay rate that we compete with. Our prices at the wholesale market are based on supply and demand and volume. Lots of cucumbers, cheap returns. So we watch the weather in every one of the other 20 growing areas. Our retail partners, many we set prices 6 to 9 months ahead of even before we plant. They're looking for the cheapest price. Many we do have to give prices a month ahead, but if they're getting a lot of calls and emails, they make us lower. For our storage onions, One of our customers is a big box store. When we negotiate price, which is 3 or 5 months out for a 10-month period, we are the highest cost producing state at the table. We're lucky they're staying loyal to US product because Canada would kill us on price. Food service prices are also negotiated, some daily, some monthly. And yes, we are definitely price takers. Thank you.
Any other questions for Maureen? Okay, we're next going to go to Stuart Ziem. Stuart, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
All right, hello, my name is Stuart Zim. I'm with Tyashook Farm in southern Washington County. Our family milks 1,100 cows and crops over 2,000 acres. Our milk is sold to the Agrimark Co-op, which owns the Cabot brand. Tonight, I am advocating to maintain the 60-hour overtime threshold. Yes, I am aware of the safety concerns with a 60-hour work week. However, we are blessed to have NICAM as a partner in New York to help ensure the safety and success of our farm workers. NICAM comes to the farm twice a year to train our 24 employees. Roughly half of those are on the cow side and half of those are on the crop team. Last year, our payroll was just over $950,000. It's the second largest expense behind feed for the animals. In 2020, we saw the 6% increase in payroll. That was due to the minimum wage increase and also the overtime requirements that were put in place. In 2021, there goes another 3% increase due to minimum wage. And this year, we're looking at repeating the same 3% increase. But I also forecasted out to look to see what lowering the threshold would do to our payroll number if we moved it from the 60 down to the 50, and we figured that would increase another 7%. So what does this all mean? So easiest way to communicate it is that in just 3 years, we've seen about $100,000 of an increase in payroll. And if the threshold were lowered just the 10 hours, it's another 100,000. All of this while the US is experiencing a 7% inflation rate currently. We take pride in being a good employer. We offer a competitive salary that is in line with others. We also provide other benefits, including housing, holiday pay, training, insurance, retirement, beef, vehicles, and up to 2 weeks paid vacation. It all adds up and helps us to retain good employees. To compound the issue further, we don't have the ability to absorb these increased costs over more production units. The dairy industry is currently flush with milk, and we're being mandated to produce 5% less than in years past. You know what scares me the most? Lowering the overtime threshold cuts into the dairy farm's profitability. Banks don't want to invest in unprofitable businesses. Unprofitable businesses aren't able to circulate the money throughout the communities. Communities lacking sound economic engines struggle socially, financially, nutritionally, and mentally. And that's where we are here in rural New York. Lowering the overtime threshold is unnecessary and does nothing but place more pressure on small businesses that hold up our rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board? Okay, we'll next go to David Bittner. David, we will unmute you and you may start.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening. My name is David Bittner. I currently work for Singer Farms as an employee. I'd like to state, first of all, that all the advocates up at the beginning of the meeting are not representing me whatsoever. I want to work 60 hours, but will be allowed to work 60 hours. Taking away my hours and moving it down to a 40-hour threshold is taking wages out of my pocket. I average around 55 hours a week. As Kim Selleck and Maureen Torrey both stated, it's pretty similar to what I make. I'm in that 40 to 50 range with all my benefits. If you drop it down to 40 hours, you're taking 15 to 20 hours on average for me away from my work schedule. That I calculate out to be about $20,000 a year in lost wages you would take out of my pocket. If I only want to work 40 hours or less, I could go to other industries if I want to, but this is a lifestyle for me, not just a job. I choose to be in agriculture, and I choose that I want to work over 40 hours. All my coworkers also are not minimum wage workers. They get housing, they get healthcare. We do other benefits that add up to quite a lot more than other coworkers of other industries. I can, if I want to, choose to work less. Time off is not an issue. I could work 40 hours, and this time of year I tend to. It's a little slower. If New York makes only 40 hours work week, I would either have to find a second job, like many of my non-agriculture friends, or move out of state to maintain the income. Currently, I am a single household income. My wife does not have to work. The other option is she would have to work to make up for that wage difference and change our lifestyle. One of my coworkers left this past week for Michigan thinking the threshold is going to go down and hedging his bets. The advocates such as Becca Dixon and Lisa Zucker earlier quoted Jim Crow laws and indentured service quotes. These issues have not been issues since before I was born. So they're bringing up history that does not matter in agriculture or agriculture issues. New York farmers and neighboring farms around me all want to be preferred employers. They give good housing, they take care of the employees, they give good wages. If this was not the case, my fellow coworkers and I would find a different job somewhere else. We are also at a disadvantage to other states based on what current regulations are happening. Making overtime down to 40 hours a week will make us even more of a disadvantage economically. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Any questions for David? Okay, we're going to go next to Elena Barbalaukis. Elena, we will unmute you and you may start.
Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. My name is Elena Varvaloukas, and I am an attorney at the Farm Worker Law Project of the Legal Aid Society of Mid-New York. Thank you to the members of the Wage Board for holding these hearings. I am testifying today in favor of lowering the overtime threshold to 40 hours. Every year, our staff reach thousands of farm workers across the state of New York, from the tips of Long Island, up through the Hudson Valley, all the way through North Country and out to Central and Western New York. The workers who call my office are living on the poverty line. We have income eligibility requirements for our services, and I don't think a farm worker has ever called up who hasn't qualified. These workers include both permanent New York residents, who still comprise the majority of farm workers in New York, and seasonal H-2A workers. I wanted to address the misleading idea that with a lower overtime threshold, New York will suddenly face a mass exodus of workers. For many New York-based workers, both their job and their housing are tied to their employer. For many, their families and communities are in New York. Their children go to school in New York. They spend their money and pay their taxes in New York, and they aren't looking to leave New York, particularly not en masse to Pennsylvania, whose minimum wage, as others have pointed out, is nearly half that of New York's. As for H-2A workers, the majority of whom in New York come from Jamaica or Mexico, they are also tied to their employers, relying on that employer to call them back year after year, or else they are relegated to a vast pool of workers, all vying for recruitment back home. It is not an easy thing for an H-2A worker to simply switch jobs, and workers know this, and many of them are terrified of losing their right to work in the United States. Giving workers more protection is not going to make an H-2A worker leave his or her job. For instance, H-2B visa jobs, which are also seasonal, and many of which pay overtime at 40 hours, are highly sought after jobs, and H-2B employers have been lobbying to raise the annual cap on visas for years. And in the H-2A context, New York is one of the few states employing large numbers of farm workers from Jamaica, and that shows no signs of changing soon. As for H-2A workers from Mexico, they are frequently forced to pay exorbitant and illegal recruitment fees at home, which they willingly pay just to obtain any H-2A job in any state. The fear that there would be a statewide shortage of available workers as a result of implementing what is, in other industries, a basic wage protection is respectfully, utterly unfounded. Thank you for your time today, and please consider lowering the threshold.
Thank you. Board members, any questions? Okay, I'm going to go next to, I don't see William Forens on. If you're here, hit that raise hand button. I also don't see Karen Kudik here. I do see Sarah Head. So Sarah, we will go to you next, and you may begin your testimony.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. My name is Sarah Head and I co-own a dairy farm, New Hope View Farms in Cortland County with 6 of my family members and 18 employees. My brothers and I are 7th generation dairy farmers, and we're asking you to please keep the current overtime threshold at 60 hours to ensure we're not the last generation. For some perspective, 5 years ago, our annual payroll was around 600,000. Due to already increasing minimum wages and current overtime, I'm projecting around 900,000 for 2022. A lower threshold will increase our payroll to about 1.2 million, another 300,000 increase. We barely broke even for 2021. It is simply not sustainable to pay the overtime wages. We will be forced to cut back hours. As you've heard numerous times, we're paid on a market price. We are price takers and cannot pass increased costs on like other industries. Nor do we have any control of the cost of our supplies, which have done nothing but increase at a rapid rate since COVID and inflation. We compete on a national basis. Putting these restrictions only on New York State will put New York State farmers at a disadvantage compared to other states. Thousands of farms have already gone out of business over the last few years in New York, and only due to operating losses. Lowering the threshold will only increase this rate. I'm proud to say that our employees are like family to us. We work together in the barns and fields, and their safety is our top priority. They currently work 50 to 60 hours, while our family members work even more. We already pay above minimum wage. On top of that wage, we provide housing, heat, electricity, internet, cable, all for free, something almost all farms do and is not being given enough credit for the savings this gives our employees. Housing is incredibly expensive in New York State. We also pay bonuses and provide beef to eat. It saddens me to hear so much testimony tonight stating farmers are racist and mistreat and exploit their workers. I'm insulted by this. I invite all of you, anyone interested, to come see our farm, talk to our employees, and you will see a different story. I'd like to point out the obvious. This is an employee market. With the country having 10 million unfilled jobs, workers can go anywhere. Everyone is hiring. If our employees were mistreated and unhappy, they would leave, but they don't. They stay and they work with us because they enjoy their jobs. I'd like to read an excerpt from Article 14 of our New York State Constitution, and I quote, "The policy of the state shall be to conserve and protect its natural resources and scenic beauty and encourage the development and improvement of agricultural lands for the production of food and other agricultural products," end quote. Lowering the 60-hour threshold directly contradicts our New York State Constitution. It puts our farms, employees, and our local food supply at risk. Please leave the current 60-hour threshold in place, and I thank you for the opportunity to be heard.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah from the board? Okay, thank you so much. And I do see that Karen is here. So Karen Kudik, we're going to go to you next, and you may begin your testimony.
Good night. I'm not Karen. I'm Octavio Vasquez, but she's traveling. So I asked her if I can take his place, if you guys give me a permit. I have a very important testimony.
I will yield to the board if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Okay, great. Can we restart our timer, please?
Yes. Good night. My name is Octavio Vasquez. I'm born in Mexico. I migrated to United States in 2000. My 22 years in United States, I've been doing agriculture work. I have another choices. Nobody forced me to do agriculture. So this is my passion. Right now, I work 10 years in a dairy farm. In the next 12 years, I've been doing beekeeping. I'm a commercial beekeeper. Right now, I'm part owners. So I've been own part of the business for the last 2 years. But I wish somebody explained to me how we're going to survive. because I'm not a millionaire. I just taking over for the business, and I don't have so much money. If you guys lower the hours to 40 hours, I don't think we can keep doing this business. My ex-boss, my partner now, he's ready to retire, so I'm taking over, but I'm really, really afraid to. I don't think I can maintain the business. And the guys we have right now, we have 19 H2A workers, 8 local workers, and my H2A workers always are worried because they don't have enough hours, and we're not going to be available to pay the overtime over 40 hours. So they are afraid we're not going to hire that many people, or we're going to be broke in 1 or 2 years, and they really happy with us. I understand the guys. My first language is Spanish. I come from Mexico, and like I said, this is the country of the opportunities. Everybody have the opportunity to choose the job they want to do. They want to do agriculture. In my 22 years, nobody abused from me. I have the proof is my first job. I worked for 10 years. My second job, I worked for 12 years. So I love beekeeping. I love agriculture, and I'm talking on both sides, like a worker and like a boss. And so please keep the 60 hours I think is the only way we can maintain this business. And we love beekeeping, agriculture. So please don't go lower. Thank you.
Thank you. Board, any questions? Okay, appreciate that. We're going to go to, I don't see Jonathan Patterson on, but if Jonathan is on, hit raise hand. I do see Senator O'Mara on. So Senator, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening to the members of the board for this chance to share my thoughts with you on the future of New York State agriculture, and particularly at this moment in time, the absolutely central and fundamental role that this wage board plays in setting the direction of that future. I am New York State Senator Tom O'Mara. The Senate district which I represent includes expansive portions of New York's Finger Lakes and Southern Tier regions, including the counties of Steuben, Yate, Schuyler, Chemung, and Tompkins. I don't need to tell you that this district is home to a great many and varying types of farms that run the gamut of New York's outstanding agricultural industry. I'll get right to the point. I have been and I remain strongly opposed to the lowering of the farm worker overtime threshold from the current 60 hours per week. I have voiced this concern from the very start in 2019, when I debated against and opposed the enactment of this Farm Workers Fair Labor Practices Act, an act which, by the way, was drafted and introduced in the state Senate and Assembly by legislators representing the epicenter of farming in New York State, Queens, New York City. Over the past 2 years, you and all of us have heard directly from those who would be most directly impacted by any lowering of the threshold and the subsequent unsustainability consequences to farm labor costs that would result. We've heard a lot of that tonight. The fact of the matter is that farming is vastly different from other industries, with forces out of the control of the business owner, with overriding impacts of commodity markets and the weather, not to mention that many farms who provide housing, food, transportation, and more that other industries do not. From everything I have seen and heard from those in New York's nation-leading industry, it appears virtually unanimous that lowering the threshold would be a disaster. The ripple effect across local communities in every region of the state, especially in upstate regions like I represent throughout the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes, could be consequential and irreversible. It risks the future of high quality local food production. The actions risk the loss of family farms and the loss of livelihoods these farms support across the industry and throughout hundreds of local economies. We heard from Cornell University, which is in my district, of their study on the impacts that this will have on farms. And we've heard from the farm workers themselves who worry about the risk of the loss of work for themselves. You risk negative consequential impacts to our orchard and vineyards, wine, fruit, cheese, and yogurt industries, to name just a few that we have worked so hard and long to foster. With my time being up, I just urge you firmly and strongly to please consider the consequences that can come to our farming industry in New York State. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight.
Board members, any questions for Senator O'Mara? Okay, Senator, thank you. I do not see the next speaker on here, David Ritchie. If you're here, David, please hit raise hand. And I'm going to go through the next group of speakers. We're on number 36, Elizabeth Hotchkiss, James Entwistle, Charlene Obernower, Thomas Kuhn, Joseph Morgovich, and Antonio Cruz. Again, I do not see David Ritchie on. I also do not see Elizabeth Hotchkiss on. If you're here, hit raise hand. I do not see James Entwistle. I do not see Charlene Obernower either. So Thomas Kuhn, oh, Charlene, you are here. I see you. Thank you for hitting raise hand. We will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Yeah. Hi, can you all hear me?
We can. You're a little broken up, but I think that'll be okay. Charlene, unfortunately, we're not able to make out anything you're saying right now. Why don't we try circling?
I have bad internet service of Nykosh, and I sorry, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, so I'm so sorry. I'm having an internet issue. But anyway, really quickly, Nykosh is a nonprofit organization of workers, union, and community-based organizations. And we've trained hundreds of farm workers on how to stay safe on the job throughout the Eastern Long Island region and heard often about their dangerous conditions. We all know that being a farm worker is not an easy job, whether you're working in high heat, cold temperatures, or regularly working at a fast-paced environment. Farm work can easily cause you to be injured or become ill as a result of the on-the-job exposure. I want to talk about a couple of studies that have shown that long working hours adversely affect the health and well-being of workers. Overtime schedules have an increased risk of hypertension, cardiovascular disease, fatigue, stress, musculoskeletal disorders, chronic infections, and all-cause mortality. In other words, working long hours can be dangerous to workers' health. Working in jobs with overtime schedules was associated in one study with a 61% higher injury rate compared to jobs without overtime. Working at least 12 hours per day was associated with a 37% increased hazard rate, and working at least 60 hours per week was associated with a 23% increased hazard rate, according to another study. The injury rate increases in correlation to the number of hours per day or per week in the worker's customary schedule. By granting farm workers access to overtime and overtime pay, we ensure that there is not an incentive to overwork farm workers to the extent that they experience health hazards or injuries as a result of their work. I'm happy to share the studies that I referenced or any other information. Apologies about my internet issues, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Okay, and just a reminder for everyone to, hold on. Oh, Brenda has a question.
Our last speaker indicated that she'd be willing to share the studies, if she would make sure she gets those submitted in a timely basis. Would be appreciated.
Thank you. I will be sure to do that.
Great. Any other questions from? Okay. Thank you so much. We're next going to go to Thomas Cohn. Thomas, we will unmute you and you may start.
Good evening. My name is Thomas Kuhn, and I am here tonight representing my family fruit farm, Windmill Farms LLC, located in Wayne County, New York. For 5 generations, my family has cultivated the same fertile soils on the southern shore of Lake Ontario, growing a variety of fruit crops. Today, our operation has grown to nearly 500 acres of apple orchards spread across both Monroe and Wayne counties, producing over 300,000 bushels of apples on an annual basis. The backbone of our workforce is the 40-man crew we employ for 10 weeks in the autumn months to hand harvest each and every apple. Our harvest crew consists of H-2A workers who travel from Mexico to live and work on our farm to harvest apples in the fall harvest season. These men, along with our key local full-time employees, are economic drivers in our local communities, supporting small businesses while also sending money back home to Mexico to support their families. We have now completed 2 full harvest seasons complying with the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act. Because of the price we receive as agricultural producers is determined by free market conditions, we act as price takers. Often, the margin we are making on our commodity does not provide us enough incentive to pay overtime to our workers in order to harvest our fruit. In the days before the regulation, the abundance of work we had during our harvest season and the opportunity to make a good living were the main reasons why we carried over a 95% retention rate on employees who returned to harvest for us year in and year out. Since the introduction of the regulation and us having to limit our harvest work week to 60 hours, several of our legacy employees have chosen to remain in Mexico for work or have found connections in other US states to travel to for employment where their work hours would not be limited. Several more employees have indicated that a lowering of the overtime threshold from 60 hours would cause them to seek other employment outside of New York. These men and women leave their families behind in their home countries for a chance to come to the United States to work hard. And although they appreciate the intention of a day of rest and time off, they desire even more greatly the opportunity to make money. As an apple producer in New York, the 2nd largest apple producing state in the nation, we compete with other large apple growing states such as Michigan and Pennsylvania, who have yet to adopt a 60-hour overtime threshold for agricultural workers. Going forward, our industry as a whole, in particular young growers such as myself, are fearful that lowering of the threshold will continue to lessen the desire that our workers have to travel to New York and work for us in favor of finding work in other states with whom we compete. The combination of these factors leaves growers facing a future of competitive disadvantage with our competitors in other Eastern apple producing states. Thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to testify before you this evening.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? All right, next we're going to go to Joseph Morgovich. Joseph, we will unmute you and you may start.
Hi, my name is Joe Morgovich. You guys can hear me, right?
We can.
I happen to be a Cornell University graduate in agricultural science, a lifelong vegetable farmer, and most importantly, the next generation in New York State agriculture. As I try to start my career as a young farmer, I can see there isn't a lot of public knowledge about this profession. So I'll take a couple minutes and tell you how this proposed legislation will affect you as the consumers. As consumers in New York State, you have a privilege. We have one of the most secure food systems in the world. You have the choices of eating non-GMO, organic, chemical-free, and locally grown year-round. As the Wage and Labor Board reviews the proposed change in legislation, I'd like to draw attention to how drastically this will disrupt our food supply in the Northeast United States. Paying overtime is simply not an option. Farm operation hours stop wherever the overtime begins. There's just simply not enough money after the inflation of inputs and stagnant prices we receive for our product. You can't make tons of money farming, and if you make any at all, you've been lucky this past year. We received the same prices as we did 20 years ago, yet everything else in the world has inflated almost 200%. We simply cannot handle another increased cost of production. It's another nail in the coffin, and more New York State farms will collapse with this added cost. Now, given this change, your life and diet as you know it will cease to exist. No more healthy greens loaded with vitamins fresh from the field. Farm-to-table restaurants will close their doors. Inner cities, who already struggle to keep healthy food on the shelves, will see increased malnutrition. No more organic, it takes too much time and labor. No more farm markets, we can't have them without our local farms. Instead, more factory farms who rely heavily on chemicals and robots, who just took the place of our human workers. Ultimately, our healthy food has just been replaced with unhealthy food, and is that really what you want? This effect isn't just felt here in New York State. Not only do farms like mine supply produce and food to the largest city in the world, but the surrounding cities and states who are just as populated with only 6 months of growing. Some seem to be forgetting that states like California get 365 days in a year. We don't. In addition to having a negative effect on our delicate food supply, think about climate change. Without New York farms who will be shut down, our food will be shipped by diesel truck from faraway states and imported from Canada and Mexico, and that just drives greenhouse gas emissions way higher. New York State farms cannot afford to pay overtime. It's not that I don't believe that me and my co-workers deserve it. It's the fact that all our other input costs are extremely high. Prices received for our crop are just not high enough to turn a profit or even stay in business. I'm very glad to see many people who want to see farmers get paid better. However, we need to get on the same page on why it can't happen the way you suggest. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Joseph? Okay. Our next speaker is going to be Antonio Cruz. I believe we're going to unmute you in a moment, but I'll go through the next group of speakers. Ted Ferber, who I don't see on here. Beth Lyon, who I do. Marilee Foster, Brett Bassard, and Cody Cellini. But Antonio Cruz, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Hola, mi esposo no está aquí, pero lo puedo hacer yo. Mi nombre es Juana Cruz y pido que paguen las horas extras después de las 40 horas. Como trabajadora agrícola, como consumidora, he visto que el precio de los productos agrícolas han subido de precio al igual que la inflación. Y según estudios muestran que los productos agrícolas subieron entre un 6 y un 7%. Es lo mismo que ha subido la inflación, mientras que el salario de trabajadores permanece igual que el año pasado. Por eso les pido que paguen horas extras después de las 40 horas. Gracias.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Okay, we will go next to, I don't see Ted Ferber on. If you're here, hit raise hand. I do see Beth Lyon. So Beth, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Good evening, Madam Chairwoman and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of reduction of the farm worker overtime threshold to 40 hours. My name is Beth Lyon, and I direct the Farm Worker Legal Assistance Clinic at Cornell Law School. Since opening in 2015, our clinic focused on representing unaccompanied, undocumented child and youth farm workers, and the clinic has assisted these young workers in 12 counties across New York State. We represent them in deportation proceedings, and we work with them to secure a special visa for child and youth immigrants who've been abandoned, abused, or neglected by one or both of their parents. These workers are a textbook vulnerable population. Only when they are strongly encouraged and supported by an adult authority figure to reduce their work hours do they fit education into their week. For example, through on-site tutoring for migrant education or in a half day at BOCES. But in our experience, the obstacle they consistently cite is that they are working too much to pursue an education. We often have to schedule our legal calls with them at odd hours in order to accommodate their long work weeks. And recently, one young man fell asleep at the table while we were prepping in advance of his court appearance as he had just come off of an early morning shift. In a child labor report issued in 2018, The Government Accountability Office singled out agriculture as having a uniquely high percentage of children in its hired labor force. Without better data from the government, the information I can provide is that in addition to all the cases my clinic and other legal services providers are handling at any one time, we constantly receive requests to represent teenage farm workers we do not have the resources to help. Our community partners also report frequent interactions with teenage workers, including young teenagers. Finally, I want to point out that the UN Food and Agricultural Organization lists availability for lower pay as one of the key pull factors inducing agricultural employers to utilize hired child workers. The information I just presented ties into the overtime threshold in two ways. In the short run, to the extent that a 40-hour overtime threshold may give young workers like my clients more free time, and I understand that that's being debated here, they would be better able to connect with their families, to pursue educational opportunities, or simply to rest. In the long run, I believe better pay and hours are one step we can take to attempt to reduce the incidence of child and youth hired labor and to help New York State farms attract a less vulnerable workforce. Thank you very much for your attention.
Brenda, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a question, and Beth, you may not be in a position to answer it, so I'd ask our labor staff. You speak of serving school age youth and representing them with your services. In New York State, we have labor laws that allow school age, particularly in-school youth, under certain age thresholds, limit their hours of work. Are those standards the standards that are not being enforced?
Thank you for the question. When I first opened the clinic here in New York State, my students asked exactly the same question. And I said, go and research it, go figure out the law. You're Cornell Law students, we can do this. And they quickly figured out that no, employers are not violating child labor laws. They are violating immigration law, which, you know, is just sort of part and parcel of the American workforce. But no, they're not violating child labor laws. The issue is that these particular children have experienced trauma in their home country. We know they've experienced trauma on their passage to the US and at the border. And then when they arrive here, the care that we give them is work in this industry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need an answer from DOL on that, because I believe it's illegal to hire children who should be in school during school hours. So I think that's something that needs to be clarified, and I am more with Brenda that we have a law against that. I don't know if they could do that now or at some other point. That should be shared with everybody, because
and
we none of us can condone bad behavior, and if it's happening, it needs to be dealt with. And so I just have a concern there.
Thank you for that point. And I'm very happy to tailor my written remarks to this question.
Any other questions from the board? Okay. Oh, it looks like we are joined by James Entwistle, who we called just a moment ago. So James, I'm going to ask you to unmute and you may go.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, very good. Sorry about that. I'm good at farming, but not computer stuff. So, okay, my name is James Entwistle with Entwistle Brothers Farm in the town of Litchfield. That's in southern Herkimer County. I'd like to thank the board and you, Chris. You're doing a great job moderating tonight. We milk about 1,500 cows 3 times a day, another 1,500 cows of young stock. We crop anywhere between 4,000 and 5,000 acres to supply feed for our animals. And we also supply feed for 3 other neighboring farms. I'm part owner of the business with my 3 brothers. And currently there's 6 of the next generation farming with us. And I've got another son in college at Cobleskill that's looking to join us in the future. And I've been appalled tonight at some of the speakers using the discrimination and racist towards us. You know, I don't think that's good at all towards us. Because I feel like we treat our workers just like they're one of our own. Farm owners are farm workers also. So if our farm were to fail due to economic pressures, 12 family members who work on it would be out of work. The people who rely on us we pay rent to, provide feed, equipment, and support to our operation would also be impacted. Another 12 plus employees would be out of work if we went out of business. And this almost seems like it's going to be one more nail in the coffin. The milk we produce supplies about 150,000 people a day with what they need for dairy necessary for their milk, cheese, butter, yogurt, ice cream, and other dairy. We're also a beef producer. I'd like to address the wages paid and the value of farm work. First, the economics of farming aren't what we wish they would be. We can't control what we get paid. And it's even worse now because before, when our expenses went up, we would just add more cows and milk more, but now we can't because there's a cap on it. That started back in 2020 during the pandemic. So now we cannot produce more to have more income. So I just urge you guys, the labor board, to please keep the threshold at 60 hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for James? Okay, we'll go next to Marilee Foster. Marilee, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Hi, good evening. I just dropped my papers on the ground, but I'm a sixth generation family farm on the east end of Long Island, New York. My brother and I once operated a 900-acre, pardon? A 900-acre potato farm. We are now farming under 200 acres based on many variables in our industry. I, like many people tonight, was troubled by some of the advocates' efforts to call attention to the racist parts of this, of not paying people fairly for their labor. But then as we moved on through testimony, we heard what sounded like a cross-cut of some of the most successful and vibrant farms in New York State, talking about $48,000 a year plus benefits, plus housing. And I know as a farmer myself, I sometimes don't take home that much. And we talked about structural change. People want to see structural change. And I think what we never understand about agriculture goes back to that, having been one and worked with the weather and the expense that the weather bears on us as farmers. I would greatly encourage the board to listen again to some of the testimony that was made tonight, particularly, I think, a man named Ellie Skelke early. We're number crunchers, we're economists, and we aren't afraid to work 90 hours a week to make it happen. We treat our employees, as many have said, his family. We share the wealth with them. As a brief example, my father, who had employees who worked for him, one for 50 years, another one for 35 years, and many for 20 years. At the end of a prosperous season, he paid both sides of the taxes and would give his best employees an entire tractor trailer load of potatoes as a bonus. The money we took in, he gave right over to that employee, and we paid both sides of that taxes as a bonus that he gave in good years. And I think farmers are generous, considerate, and wise, and you do not want to wash us out of your culture. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you. Any questions for Marilee on the board? Okay, we are going to go next to Brett Bassard. Brett, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Good evening. I'm testifying today in opposition to lowering the current overtime threshold of 60 hours for farm employees. I'm a fourth-generation dairy farm owner. I'm in business with 3 other farm families, and we are blessed to be able to take care of over 6,000 animals, are stewards to 9,000 acres of land, and we work side by side, day in and day out, with 75 of agriculture's best people. I was born in the Southern Tier, where my parents had a small dairy farm of 60 cows. It is here that I learned empathy, hard work, and respect, lacking by many today. I traveled a few hours east to attend SUNY Morrisville and Cornell University. While at Cornell, I had the ability to complete a summer internship on the farm that I am now an owner at. You have heard numerous statements from others describing the uncertainty that climate has on farming, the inability to simply stop caring for our animals when certain hours limits have been met, and the helplessness of farmers when it comes to what we are paid for many of our products. I stand in support of all of these statements, but let me provide you with some facts from our family's farm. Of our 75 employees, 65 of them are full-time, 51% are American-born, 49% reside from Mexico and Guatemala. And interestingly, when looking at our payroll, 14% of our employees have not had continual employment during their tenure on our farm. These include those who have went back to their home country and since returned, started as part-time employees during high school and college, or have left for another job and then since returned when the grass was not greener on the other side. In 2021, our total gross cash wages divided by the total hours worked resulted in an average wage of $16.45 per hour, far above the New York State minimum wage. And this was before vacation time, sick time, IRA contributions, housing, utilities, internet, holiday bonuses, and clothing. To say that our employees are being exploited couldn't be farther from the truth. Farm employees are being paid a fair and reasonable wage. If they were not, why would they continue to work for us? And I'd like to take a moment to reiterate that important part of that last statement. They choose. Yes, this is still an at-will employment state, and any employee can quit any job at any day if they're not satisfied. I have listened to many tonight and previous nights that have attempted to make your decision one based on feelings and emotions, while slandering today's farm families with statements of discrimination of Black and brown people, references to Jim Crow laws, and religious morals. I cannot speak for all dairy farmers, but I can certainly speak for myself. We take great pride in the accomplishments of our employees, both on and off the farm. We attend birthdays, weddings, coordinate on-farm clinics for vaccinations, and help them to access credit for cars or homes when they need assistance. All of these are which are far from slanderous statements made earlier. I urge you to make your decision with facts and remember that farming is certainly different from other industries in many ways. I again thank you for your service to this board.
Thank you. Any questions for Brett? Okay, before we get to Cody, I'm gonna read through the next set of names. We're now at number 47, Barbara Regenspan, Michael Wright, David Zittel, and Tanisha Owens, George Mueller, and Levi Cahan. Cody Cellini, we're going to unmute you next, and you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. I'm Cody Cellini. At 28 years old, I'm the owner-operator of Cellini Farms, now a third-generation apple farmer and fresh market vegetable producer here in New York State. And I'm advocating to keep the overtime threshold at 60 hours. Our normal operation, we employ H-2A visa workers on our farm seasonally from approximately June to October. Our operation is mostly time-sensitive work, whether it be cultivation of vegetables to prolong their life to enable that we can harvest them in a timely manner, or apple thinning and apple harvest. Our crew has been very happy at 60 hours. And as some people have mentioned today, with H-2A visa, we pay for their housing that's in their contract. It's a very expensive proportion of what we have to do in our operation. Also paying for transportation. That's to the farm, from home to the farm, to the bank so they can cash their checks, to the grocery store. Another point I'd like to make is we fall under the adverse wage effect for H2A, which sustains us or puts us over the minimum wage every year. This past year was at $14.99 an hour. This coming year is going to be up to $15.30 an hour. Also, as stated before, we're in a commodity pricing market, and sometimes the prices that we get do not reflect changes in our input costs, which looking at this coming year, we're going to be looking at a 200% increase in fuel prices from 2020. Fertilizer could be upwards of 100% in some fertilized mixes. I want to say I have been a statistic prior to H2A of crews coming to our farm and actually leaving us to go out of state to other farms that could give them 65, 70, 75 hours. So it really, what you're looking at here is it could possibly be detrimental to my livelihood as well as the people that come to our farm every year. And just looking real quick at what that could mean for my crew coming in next year, if they're dropped down to 40 hours, at a minimum, they're going to be losing upwards of $230 per week per person. So again, please keep it at 60 hours so we can sustain farming in New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Cody? I did want to ask David a quick question. David, we do have a response prepared from our Deputy Commissioner Milan Bott. If you're interested in the question you had raised earlier, but up to the board if you want to hear that now or wait for something later.
Okay, anytime. I just think it should be addressed because it is a question, and I think everybody here would want to do the right thing.
Great. So our Deputy Commissioner Milan Bott for Deputy Commissioner for Worker Protection is now on, and Milan, you are good to go.
Thanks, Chris. I'll be brief. Just Dave, in response to the question, we certainly wouldn't say that child labor is universally the case or not the case in agriculture. The approach that we will always take is to conduct a thorough investigation to look at factors such as the age of the worker, the number of hours worked per week, whether or not the worker is engaged in what we consider to be hazardous or highly dangerous work and other factors. And so really, it is something that we evaluate case by case. So, our position is certainly not that it's universally the case or that it's completely not an issue in this industry. And I should mention that it's not something that's specific necessarily to agriculture as well.
Any questions from the board for Milan? Okay, thank you so much, Milan. And we will continue now with testimony. I do not see Barbara Regenspan on. I do see Michael Wright. So Michael, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Michael Wright, and I am a manager and the head grower at Amos Siddle & Sons in Eden, New York, where we grow a broad variety of vegetables over a course of 350 acres. In the heat of our season in the summer, we employ about 100 employees, if not more. Well, I'm sure most of you heard the economics of the overtime over 40 situation here in New York. I'd like to touch on the misconception from the individuals outside of our industry that we overwork or even abuse our employees. This is simply unfounded, untrue, and ridiculous. Our employees are our number one asset, and without them, we would be unable to farm. I would never ask anyone in our organization to do something that I wouldn't do myself. Our employees' health and safety is our number one priority. It always has been, and it will continue to be so for years in the future. That's why before our employees even arrive for the season, we have rigorous housing inspections from the health department and housing that is provided free of cost to our employees. On top of this, we also provide trainings and safety for sexual harassment, pesticide training, and equipment training, all put in place to keep our employees safe. We also really advocate that we have an open line of communication with our employees in order to keep people safe and keep people working with us, and also with trust. Our employees leave their families for 6 months out of the year in order to come here to provide for their loved ones back home. They arrive here with the expectation they will be able to work as many hours as they would like in order to accomplish this. Our employees are our family. I've heard this time and time again tonight, and it's been amazing, and I truly believe it. They are family. Some have been with the farm longer than me. That's over 16 years. I have helped numerous employees get their driver's license, find housing, and establish their lives here in New York. Lowering the threshold will ultimately hurt these workers that is supposedly trying to help. In addition, I would also like to touch on the side of New York State has put numerous steps towards fighting climate change. We see it all over the board. And if this 60 hours drops to 40, we are going to see an increase in farms closing, and agricultural commodities are going to have to be shipped from further and further away. I've heard it touched on once before tonight. As trucking continues to be more expensive, it's also going to increase our carbon footprint with fuel, and it's going to cause agricultural commodities in the store to increase across the board for all residents in New York State. We ask you to please leave the threshold where it is and continue supporting local New York farms. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions from the board? Okay, we're going to go next to David Siddle. David, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Once again, thank you, everybody, especially the Wage Board and you, Chris, for monitoring this. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you folks on behalf of all of agriculture in New York State. First and foremost, I am also part of Amos Siddle & Sons. Mike is a partner of mine. I'm a fourth generation farmer. I think you heard from my son last night or 2 nights ago. He's the beginning of the fifth generation. We run about 300 acres of fresh vegetables. I'm going to keep it really simple and try to also bring up something that was a very proud moment in my family's history. I think it's a simple message if we try to filter through all the information that we're hearing back and forth from our farmers and from our people that we work with, people that we sell to, industry people, Farm Credit East, Cornell. It's a pretty simple message. The farmers won't be able to pay overtime, can't pay overtime, won't pay overtime. I think that's evident by the holding back to 60 hours because that's what we were limited to. If it goes less, we will hold our workers back. The workers are resounding high percentage saying that they do not want less than 60 hours. And we have heard repeatedly that less than 60 hours, they will probably look for employment in other states around us that don't have to work with that threshold. One of our proud moments that I was talking about, and I'm just going to hold it here. Obviously, you guys can't read this. But in 1997, our farm received the Century Award from New York State. And just reading quickly the first paragraph, the Empire State has a proud agricultural heritage that can be traced back to the earliest days of its history as leaders among states. Since our nation's founding, farming has been one of New York's most important industries, and its families maintain a uniquely dedicated way of life founded upon the time-honored values of decency, trust, and respect for this precious soil called America. Farming represents a tradition of stewardship of lands that connect past and present generations. I think that pretty much sums it up. Less than 20 years ago, we were very proud to receive that award. I question how much longer that can last. Will I be able to, the rest of my life, be okay? Sure. But as been said different ways, different times, the corridor that we live in Erie County is very desirable for housing developments. And if we have to, I guess we'll have to park the tractor and start planting houses. And the local economy will no longer see fresh food and vegetables in the Wegmans, Tops, field to fork programs, and other things like that in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for David? Okay, we're going to go next. I do not see if they are here. Please hit raise hand. But Antonisha Owens. So we will go to George Mueller next. George, we will unmute you and you may start.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, good. First, I want to thank all the good folks that made all the complicated arrangements to put this hearing together so that us farmers could tell our side of the issue. It is a critical issue. It will affect the survival of many New York State farms. Our workers do not want a 40-hour week. Half our workers are Hispanic and have left their families back home while they earn the large wages that we offer. We pay them well. Most earn over $50,000 for a full year. Some even over $60,000. They want those high wages that a 60-hour or a 70-hour per week schedule will give them. They are saving and sending the money home so their families can live well now and live well when they return. Many are saving enough to have a home of their own when they return. Our workers will not accept a 40-hour work week. They will move to the surrounding states where they can work their 60 and 70 hours that they want. Time and a half over 60 we can pay. Not all reach that level, and those that do are so valuable to us that we dig deep in our pockets and pay it. Time and a half over 40 hours will require wages we cannot possibly meet. It will be a fatal blow to many New York State dairy farms. It must not be allowed to occur. New York has been a great dairy state, number 3 in the nation and lately number 4, behind California, Wisconsin, and Idaho. Making New York dairy farmers pay time and a half when our competing states do not have to. This will further the shift of dairy farming out of our beautiful state. Do not put New York at a disadvantage compared to other states, please. In summary, we are talking about the survival and prosperity of New York's major agricultural business, dairy farming. If government regulations for our state make it unprofitable in our state, over time, our dairy industry will shift to more profitable states. We can't move the land, but we can move people, cows, and machinery. Our land will find a less labor-intensive use or grow up to trees. Going to a 40-hour week for overtime in New York on New York dairy farms would be a fatal blow for many of our farms. Please keep the overtime level at 60 hours to keep our New York dairy industry competitive with other states. Thank you.
Any questions for George? Okay, I do not see Levi Kahan on here. Our next few speakers are going to be Matt Gettinger, Paul Ruskowitz, David Walchuk, and Brian Reeves. So I do not see Levi. So Matt Gettinger, we will go to you and you may begin your testimony.
Okay, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson and respective board members, and thanks for hearing my testimony. My name is Matt Gettinger, and I'm a third-generation nurseryman operating out of Suffolk County, New York. I'm testifying tonight requesting that the board maintain the current 60-hour overtime threshold. As many of the hardworking farmers have testified tonight, we have a very challenging economic disadvantage currently versus our regional competitors. I think that it's important that this board recognizes that this room is made up of individuals whom all elect to work long hours during our shortened growing season to make ends meet. We as operators are all working our tails off alongside our employees to keep these farms going. The way that I hear this testimony portrayed tonight, it makes it sound as if our owners today in the state of New York are fat cat plantation owners. I don't know if you guys have been to your local farm lately, but most farms near me are holding on, but they're far from comfortable, despite what we would all consider a solid past decade of demand. These farms are not operating brand new tractors and machinery, not because we don't want them, but because we can't afford them. I know I personally work my tail off to afford the maintenance cost of my mostly geriatric but reliable equipment. I witnessed a testimony earlier this evening by a professor explaining how productivity works to a group of farmers. Excuse me, with all due respect, but this group eats, sleeps, and breathes productivity every second of every workday. Comparing the average weekly overtime hours in California to the average seasonal employee in New York is apples and oranges, and I didn't see any data points on New York State seasonal overtime average by comparison. I sincerely hope that the board is being provided with real stats that are worth analyzing in a truly objective way. 2 hours of overtime around our local farms is a pipe dream during our short windowed seasons. Over the past 10 years, my nursery, like others, has focused on becoming more environmentally minded operation. We emphasize and focus on a balance and have made decisions to increase labor versus applying traditional chemical measures on our land. After all, we're an operation that provides native plants to state-funded projects across the region, and we do this against out-of-state low-bid competitors whom already have a wage cost advantage. This much I know, we cannot add cost to our operation and continue to try and compete. This basically means that we are being asked to lower the work week from 60 hours to 40 for all of our hourly workers to maintain a parallel variable product cost versus our regional competitors. You're essentially asking us to hire approximately 33% more employees, or we have to just find more productivity. Our industry struggled to find workers as it was the past few years. I don't want to go back to relying upon chemical agriculture. The board is going to really have to understand the implications of creating more labor shortages and what the alternatives of labor will mean to our farms, to the environment, and to the state's food supply chain. Don't make a mistake on this. Farmers are resilient workers, but this dramatic change to a work week is not something that we can overcome by ourselves. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Okay, we're going to go next to Paul Rushkowitz. Paul, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Okay, thank you. My name is Paul Ruskevich. I'm a fourth generation vegetable grower here in Orange County. I am happy to be here this evening to participate and listen to this hearing. I've also listened to and participated in other hearings on the same issue. One thing I would like to point out is that the vast majority of those speaking in favor of keeping the 60-hour threshold are farmers and farm workers. Those are going to be most directly affected by this change. Those who have spoken in favor of reducing that threshold to 40 hours a week are not farmers or farm workers. What I do find also disturbing is that I've heard many claims of racism, exploitation, and a general lack of concern for the health and well-being of farm workers. I've also heard my fellow farmers express their frustration with these comments. I share those frustrations because those comments could not be any further from the truth. Our employees are critically important to the success of our businesses. We do understand how hard they work and the challenges that they face because we are right there in the field working alongside them. In addition to being a farmer, I also serve as an Orange County legislator. I'm currently the only farmer serving on the legislature. I understand the policymaking process and what it takes to make good policy. In order to make good policy and effective laws, you have to listen to your constituents and you have to listen to those who are most directly affected by those changes. In this case, that is farmers and farm workers. The overwhelming majority of those speaking in favor of keeping the 60-hour threshold are farmers and farm workers, those who are most directly affected by these changes. If our lawmakers in New York State want to enact effective policy to ensure the future success of our farms and the well-being of our farm workers, they need to listen to their constituents and the stakeholders and enact good policy. I encourage all of you to do that. I want to thank the Wage Board for taking the time to listen to all of us. I want to thank all of my fellow farmers for being here this evening to share your concerns and sharing the impacts that's going to have on our industry and our businesses. Thank you.
Questions for Paul? Okay, I do not see David Walczek on. If you're here, please hit raise hand. Next, we are going to go to Brian Reeves, after which we're going to do a board check-in. But Brian, you have been, we will circle back after Brian. I see David's there, but Brian will unmute you and you may begin.
Hello, I'm Brian Reeves. I'm president of the New York State Vegetable Growers Association, and I'd like to address a couple of issues. One is that throughout the hearing and even our negotiations two years ago, we often heard the phrase that we want farm workers to have the same rights as all workers. And I guess I'm looking at it a different way. I believe that lowering the threshold to 40 hours will take away some of the rights of the farm workers. There is no artificial ceiling at 40 hours. There is an artificial ceiling at 60 hours, and most of the workers on many of the vegetable farms in the state aren't very happy about having that ceiling. Most of the workers on vegetable farms are from the H-2A visa program. They make a great sacrifice leaving their families and loved ones in Mexico and come to work here for what often is about 10 times the wage that they can make in Mexico if they find a job there. And so having this artificial, having it lowered to 40 hours to make an artificial cap on their hours, they're not very happy about. Most of the workers on these vegetable farms have not been that happy about 60, but management has made adjustments. They didn't work that many more hours than 60, so it's been working. In fact, earlier tonight, there was some testimony from a lawyer, I believe from Cornell, that didn't think it was easy to switch jobs with H-2A, and that she thought it was kind of a myth that H-2A workers would not leave the state. Well, I guess I would ask her how many H-2A workers she's ever hired or recruited or worked alongside, because I have had plenty that I have and vegetable growers in New York have, and they are very well connected. The fellows on our own farm all have smartphones. They all surf the web. They all text their friends. They're on Snapchat. They talk at home to their families every night. And so they know what friends and relatives in other states are making. They know what other farms in the states are making. And they're a very well-connected group. And they have told us repeatedly that, gee, we can live with 60, but if it gets down to 50 hours or 40 hours, we're going to seriously look at other states and other farms. What kind of boggles my mind is when we talk about lowering the threshold to 40 hours for overtime, it is talked about in terms of being a disincentive to work a lot of hours. And when the debate happens, we always hear from a couple of social scientists or a couple of biomechanic experts that talk about how we should not work too many hours. But as soon as somebody gets their wallet out and is willing to pay any overtime, those opinions disappear. If we really cared about this worker welfare, where are the laws that limit mandatory overtime? There are none in New York. I think it's kind of a dirty little secret that, like, well, gee, we kind of like to have limits at 40 hours, but are you buying? Are you paying overtime? Well, gee, let's have those hours then. So we hear both sides, which I find disingenuous. You either care about the workers' physical and mental well-being, or you do not. And it's kind of like I want our cake and eat it too. We want reduced hours, we want greater pay. I'm also just want to say a word in defense of my industry. Occasionally we hear someone testify and they use the phrase Jim Crow. And that's a dog whistle in my book. When these laws were passed in 1938, there was definitely on the record some racist comments by Southern Democrats. However, at that time in New York, who also had the same carve out for agriculture, the majority of farm workers were white. This was not based on race in New York State. It was based on the expediency of climate, the limitations of weather, the limitations of low commodity prices, and the perishability of farm crops. And through the years, our workforce has kind of evolved into other groups of people. But it wasn't that the law was racist towards people. When it was first developed and embraced by New York State, the vast majority of workers were white. At any rate, I'll finish up my remarks. Thank you for listening.
Any questions for Brian? Okay, and we did see that David Walchuk is here. So we'll go to David and then we will have a board touch base. So David, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Hi, thank you for hearing my voice. Everybody can hear me, correct?
We can.
Excellent. I'm David Walczak, the operations manager for Eden Valley Growers in Western New York here, just south of Buffalo. We represent 10 of our member growers, including Amos Siddle and Sons, Henry Eagle and Sons, W.D. Henry, some big names here on this side of the state. And on top of that, we're also the Western New York Food Hub. So besides our membership, we represent another 10 to 15 non-member growers, taking their goods to major retailers to all parts of the state and down the East Coast. With that all being said, people that come up on our dock here that are H-2A workers working for these farms, they're happy people. They want to be where they're working. They want to be working for our growers. To think that to lower the threshold, to lower the overtime to 50 or 40 hours, that they will keep coming back and be happy people is just a bad thought. They will not come back. And if that happens, our farms will not survive. The programs that New York has fought so hard to put in place, the farm to school programs, the Nourish New York, the Feed More, the food banks, all programs that get products from our growers will all fail. 60 hours will not work. 60 hours has to be in place. 40 hours won't work. 50 hours will not work. It has to be 60 hours. We've seen costs of goods go up across the board. Fertilizer costs have doubled. Container costs have gone up by 2/3. Costs of field plastic, cost of drip tape, all the inputs before they even put the product in the ground has gone up. And if the overtime rule changes, farms will fail. Don't change the rule. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Okay, we appreciate it. Now, as asked, we are going to do a board check-in. So we will unmute all of our board members.
Well, as I see it, we got 35 plus people left, and at 8:30, I don't think we will be paying good enough attention to get through that. So I would suggest we maybe do 4 or 5 more and then defer the rest of these to the next Friday's hearing.
Yeah, sure.
Or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Could we go till 9 o'clock? Because next week, if we do, we still have the video presentations, and then we would probably have 25 people if people come back to testify. And then we want to have the board have some deliberations next week. So are you willing to stay till at least 9?
Yes.
Okay.
David, 9? Okay. So hearing that, we're gonna move right along and we'll go until about 9 o'clock. Those individuals who unfortunately we don't get to after that, once that time hits, we apologize. We just have a very large number of individuals, which shows that obviously people are, this is a very important topic area that we're covering. We do want to allow for everyone to be able to give testimony. So at this point in time, we will reschedule you in the order that you appear on the current roster for Friday, unless we hear otherwise from you. So we will go till about 9 o'clock.
Great. And we will definitely email everyone individually too, to let them know the specific time as well, once that's officially confirmed. The speakers to come are Minerva BR, Dulce Galina, Richard Stupp, Devon Shelmadine, Brooke Head, and Kelly Reynolds. So Minerva, we did see you on here. We will unmute you and you may begin.
Gracias. Mi nombre es Minerva Villar. Trabajo como organizadora con los Trabajadores Agrícolas Unidos y la local 888 UFCW. En los últimos 3 años he tenido la oportunidad y el privilegio de conocer muchos trabajadores agrícolas y sus familiares en la ciudad de Long Island. Por mucho tiempo, los dueños de granjas se han beneficiado de la explotación y la exclusión a sus trabajadores de derechos básicos, como es el de pago por tiempo extra. Aunque la nueva ley, conocida como la Ley de Prácticas Laborales Justas para Trabajadores Agrícolas de Nueva York, les provee alguna protección, eso no significa el fin. El pago de horas extra debe usar siempre la jornada de 40 horas de trabajo como su punto de partida. He visto trabajadores agrícolas laborando por la mañana, tarde y noche, bajo condiciones duras, realizando trabajos físicos intensos. Ellos hacen todo esto para que las granjas de Nueva York sean exitosas y para que todos nosotros tengamos comida en nuestras mesas. Poner en práctica una política de horas extra usando una jornada diaria más corta es un asunto fundamentalmente humano. A los trabajadores les encantaría pasar más tiempo compartiendo y disfrutando de sus familiares. Y si su trabajo los retiene, entonces ellos deberían de ser recompensados de manera justa. Ellos están perdiendo de participar en eventos en las escuelas, pierden de ir a una celebración, una fiesta de sus hijos, no pueden compartir a un juego de fútbol que se le presenta a sus hijos y pierden tiempo de compartir y comer juntos a su familia. Y como diría mi hija de 3 años de edad, eso no está bien. Yo nací, fui criada en Nueva York. Estoy orgullosa de ser neoyorquina. Aunque la mayoría de los trabajadores agrícolas no nacieron aquí, ellos también están orgullosos de ser neoyorquinos. Todos los trabajadores en Nueva York en la industria de comida reciben pago por tiempo extra después de haber trabajado 40 horas en una semana. Los trabajadores que conozco usan cuchillos muy afilados para las plantas, recogen cosas pesadas, tienen que tener mucho cuidado cuando utilizan cualquier químico, tienen que estar alerta al manejar de granja en granja. Cuando un trabajador está cansado, es difícil de hacer las cosas de manera segura si tu trabajo te requiere todo eso. Eso ustedes lo saben. Yo he visto como una pequeña cortada se infecta y se hace más grande la herida porque el trabajador simplemente no tiene el tiempo para atenderse. Yo he visto sus manos llenas de cicatrices. ¿Acaso no es igualdad uno de los pilares que definen a Nueva York? Quizá esa sea una de las razones por lo que Nueva York es tan exitoso. La Junta Salarial debería de asegurar que estos neoyorquinos también se les trate justamente.
Thank you. Any questions for Minerva? Okay, we're going to go next. I do not see Dulce Galina on. If Dulce is here, please hit raise hand. And not seeing them, we're going to go to Richard Stubb. Richard, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Just one moment. Can I share my screen?
I just allowed you to do that.
Okay, is that coming through?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Stubb. I'm the director of the Cornell Agricultural Workforce Development Program. And thanks for allowing me to speak. Dr. Wolf shared already some information with you about our overtime report. And another part of our project was to understand how foreign guest workers in the H-2A visa program might react to changes in the overtime threshold. And there's been certainly a lot of debate about that. And we simply asked the workers, and this is what they told us. 69 farm workers from across New York completed our survey with a bilingual researcher. The surveys were conducted privately and not in the immediate presence of farm managers. So we asked H-2A workers how they would respond to lower overtime thresholds at 50 and 40 hours, and assuming that they would receive no or few hours of overtime above the threshold. If hours were capped at 50 hours per week, 56% of workers said they would be less likely to continue at their current job. 39% indicated it would not matter, and 5% said that they would be more likely to continue. Considering a 40-hour threshold, 72% indicated that they would be less likely to continue at their current job, while 28% said it would not matter. Workers were also asked if work hours were capped or limited in other U.S. states, were not capped in other states while they were in New York, would you consider going to that state instead of New York? 70% of respondents said they would consider going to a state without limits on hours. We also asked H-2A workers to comment about their jobs. And the most common response was that they appreciated their current farms, but the primary motivation for taking the job was to maximize income during their time in the US. Many H-2A workers would go elsewhere if hours were limited because of an overtime threshold. And, I'll let them speak with some of the comments that they shared with us, but I really enjoy this job. But if hours are limited, I would have to look for a job in another state. And then the last one there says, that's why we come here. That's what we want, hours. So let's talk about overtime a little bit. I'd like to share some other important data points about overtime used by businesses. Since 1956, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has tracked weekly overtime use by manufacturing business. It's not the same as agriculture, but it's what they track. Over that period, the average weekly overtime hours of employees was 3.7 hours per week. The highest overtime use was in December of 97 at 5.3 hours per week. So we conduct a benchmark survey every few years to help farm employers understand compensation trends. So we collected 2020 data about 88 full-time permanent frontline New York farm employees. These employees averaged about 175 hours of overtime for the year, which would be about 3 hours per week, similar to manufacturers. Employers won't pay large amounts of overtime if there is any possible way to avoid it. A little bit more data, I know I'm about out of time, but a little bit more data about income if the board members want to hear that.
Board members? Up to you. Okay.
Do you have any questions for me?
Got data to me in writing, and I'll look at it myself.
Okay. Okay, I will share the compensation data that we collected from those 88 frontline farm employees, which is who we're really focused on with this group of folks. But it's really going to be comparable to a lot of the numbers that you heard tonight from other employers because that's the source of the information.
Okay, and it'll have all the citations and footnotes and everything with it.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, good.
David, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just would like Richard to explain a little bit about how he got his job and why. It was industry sponsored or asked for, and some of the programs that he's done to train employers on all the rules, regulations, and how to be good employers, so that it's out there, because that needs to be in the record because of all the other comments we've heard.
Yeah, that's a great question, David. I didn't really expect that, but thanks for asking. So before I came to New York, I've been here about 4 years, but before that, the organization, the industry had organized itself into a group called the Ag Workforce Development Council. And that group of people worked together to really address issues like improving housing management for farm employees, improving safety for farm employees, recruiting, retaining employees. They were very progressive and really getting into a lot of these issues. But farmers are busy and they needed some help, and so they worked together, with the state in order to get additional funding in order to get our program started. And I had the opportunity to come here, start that program, work with others. We do a lot of programs, certainly compliance. There's a lot of compliance to do in New York, compliance education. So we work very hard at that. We also work on things like helping improve culture on farms, helping different groups of people understand each other better, improve communications. We've started something now called supervisory leadership. And what we're doing there is helping to train farm managers, middle managers to become more effective supervisors. We actually have quite a few Spanish-speaking people who are rapidly advancing on farms and need supervisory training. And so we've had a number already in the workshops, which are in English right now. We have plans down the road to offer that training fully in Spanish, because that's a fantastic and growing part of our industry that we're trying to reach out to and help them grow in their careers. So just a couple of things that we're working on for this industry.
Okay.
Brenda?
And are you funded by New York State, or is the organization independently funded through contributions made by farmers or others? What's your
We are
source of-
funded by New York State.
Okay.
So my basic funding is from New York State, goes to Cornell. And then, various other, we've applied for grants and different programs in order to grow what we're doing. We've also increasingly funded by, I'll say, user fees through training programs and workshops and that sort of thing. And so that's, training managers and employees on farms.
And who pays that user fee? I mean, who pays the tuition for workers to be trained?
Well, that's farmers. Farmers
Okay.
farmers pay for training for
For their
employees.
workforce to participate in some of your courses. Okay,
Right.
thank you. We'll look forward to your report.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
The labor roadshow that we did this year, or Richard did, was probably one of the best training programs across the country, and covered a lot of topics. So
Thank you. Thanks for your time. And we've got a lot of data on these subjects you're looking at. And so I'm happy that anytime any of the board members want to reach out, I'm happy to try to give you the best available objective data that really makes sense in the farm context. One of the things that's challenging as a data person, and you can talk to the folks in labor and ag and markets, and increasingly in health, because I was providing them a lot of data, especially through the COVID outbreak. A lot of times people don't understand the farm workforce and are often misled by some of the data that they're looking at. It takes some time to really understand what you're looking at. So that invitation is open to the board.
Thank you so much. All right, we do have a few more folks that I announced, so we should definitely get through them. Devon Shelmadine is going to be our next speaker. Devon, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Good evening. First, excuse me. First, let me start by saying that I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is excuse me again. My name is Devon Shelmadine, and I'm a dairy producer and custom farm service provider operating in northern New York in the town of Ellisburg near Fort Drum with my father, uncle, and brother. We milk about 900 cows, farm about 3,000 acres, and provide farming services to approximately 20 other farms in our area. I also have the pleasure of serving as the president of the Jefferson County Farm Bureau, an organization representing a combination of over 300 farmers, agribusinesses, and farm employees in northern New York, whose job is to produce high-quality food products for our neighbors, both near and far. I'm here today to urge you to keep 60 at 60, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of our farm employees. On our farm in 2021, the 6 employees who work strictly with the dairy animals producing high quality milk that is turned into cheese, yogurt, sour cream, and butter worked an average of just over 3,800 hours for the year and were paid on average $53,000. Our employees on average worked a little over 640 hours of overtime. They were not required to work these hours. They asked for those hours. All employees who have worked on our farm for at least a year are paid a week's vacation, an average week's vacation pay. Works out to be about $1,000 on top of their hourly wage. The employees are offered to have that time off, but many of them choose to work the time instead and are paid for that work also. All of our employees are provided housing with heat, electric, cable, and a uniform service and laundry at the farm's expense. This is one of the many reasons why agriculture is different from other industries. In many other industries, those extra benefits are not part of the compensation package above and beyond the hourly wage. One of our farm's concerns with lowering the overtime threshold is that we would have to cut back hours to our employees in order to maintain our current payroll levels. And our employees may choose to relocate where they can work more hours or be forced to work a second job. If employees choose to work a second job, that creates a biosecurity and therefore a food security issue, as diseases can be transmitted between farms. There's also a benefit to the employees if they work at one farm that they know the employers, they know their coworkers, they know the equipment, they know the animals, and it's safer for them than if they're trying to understand 2 operations. In many non-farm businesses, employees still work just as many hours as our agriculture employees do. It's just that they work for more than one employer. Again, I'm discouraged by the comments made earlier about the racism and echo the thoughts that most everybody that's been pushing to lower the limit to 40 hours is not directly involved with this. They don't have a vested interest. Most of the farmers and farm employees are asking to keep it at 60. And please do the responsible thing and do that for our industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Devon from the board? Okay, we're going to go next to Brooke Head. Brooke, we will unmute you and you may begin.
Hey, hi, my name is Brooke Head and I'm the wife of a dairy farmer and an ag educator in Cortland County, New York. I'm asking you to please keep the current overtime threshold at 60 hours. I've been a part of the Head family for over 13 years and have been a witness to the passion, drive, determination, and dedication it takes this family to run such an ever-changing business. I've witnessed the blood, sweat, and many tears that go into making a wholesome food for our country, and I do not want to see that come to an end. If you pass the 40-hour overtime threshold, it will likely be the beginning of the end of not only our 7th generation dairy farm, but many farms in New York State. Being the wife of a dairy farmer is not for the faint of heart. Many do not survive the long hours, sleepless nights, the stress, the weather, the calls in the middle of the night, bringing food to the field, riding in the tractor just to spend time with your significant other, the many missed family events, and so much more. I ask that you do not change the overtime threshold to 40 hours a week. My husband will often work 80+ hours a week during peak crop season. He has always been a hard worker and is always willing to do everything it takes to make sure his animals are getting the best feed possible in such a short window of time. He has no choice. They must work when the sun shines and the weather is ideal for planting and harvesting. This means working well into the night and sometimes only getting a few hours of sleep in the morning before going back out and doing it again the next day. He works 7 days a week, 365 days a year, unless he is physically out of town. If the overtime threshold were to pass to 40 hours a week, my husband would have to pick up the extra time that we can't afford to hire an employee for. So what, now he'll be working 100 hours a week instead of 80? He has already stretched to the max as it is. I understand the need to protect our employees and their families, but their lives are not the ones in jeopardy here. The farm owners and their families' lives are in jeopardy as well. We provide our employees with a more than fair wage, over minimum wage, housing, heat, electricity, internet, and cable. Our employees can just go find somewhere else to work that can provide them the hours they need and want if we can't. If they weren't happy with their current situation, they would have left already. Who is protecting the farm owner and their families? They can't just decide to stop farming overnight because it gets hard. It's in their blood and they want nothing more than to continue to provide food for our country. but the countless regulations are making it nearly impossible. To end on a more personal note, my husband and I have been putting off having a family of our own because it's just been too hard with all the hours he currently works. We are now expecting our first child this summer, and I'm worried about my husband missing so much of my child's life. If this were to pass, it would only exacerbate my worry and concern. So please think of my family and other families in our situation when you make your decisions. Thank you.
Any questions for Brooke? Okay. Looking at the time, I think our last speaker to testify tonight is going to be Kelly Reynolds. So Kelly, we will unmute you and you may begin your testimony.
Hi, good evening. I'd like to thank the Labor Board for letting us testify tonight. I'm a dairy farmer and a part of a dairy farm family in Western New York. We farm over 2,700 acres and milk 1,600 cows, but the numbers aren't really that important when we're talking about what we are tonight. We've heard a lot of testimonies tonight, and I think the most important thing I want to end with maybe is I've heard some comparisons to I've heard dairy and agriculture being compared to other industries, and I think it's really important for this group to realize that there is no other industries like agriculture, and especially in the dairy industry. It's been said earlier tonight, but we are price takers. And we cannot pass these costs onto our consumers. And it's so important for us and future generations that want to farm to keep the overtime threshold at 60 hours so that we are able to make a living and keep dairy and agriculture in New York State and have a sustainable agriculture economy in New York. We cannot afford to lose our employees to other states and other industries. And like so many others have said tonight, our employees are a huge part of our team. We treat them with respect. We work side by side with them, and they choose to work at our farms and our operations. And I think it's really important to remember that it is a choice, and we do everything we can on a daily basis to create a positive work environment. And I just want to end on that note that the respect that we pass down to our employees, they pass down to how they care for our land, how they care for our cattle. And it's really important to us to remain at the 60-hour threshold so that we can keep providing for New York and keep our food sources local to the state. So thank you for having us testify, and please take into consideration all of the farmers and agriculturalists words tonight.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the board for Kelly? Okay. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
First of all, I want to thank everyone who set aside time out of their schedules. I watched the number of people who are participating in this process, as well as listened actively as my fellow board members to all your testimony. And we've had a very large audience at each and every hearing. We take this matter very, very seriously, and your participation in helping us understand information and hear from you directly is very important. We apologize to those who we were not able to get to tonight because we want to listen to you actively and take in what you want to share with us. As we stated, we will take you in the order that you appeared tonight at our next hearing, which will be Friday, the 28th of January at 2 p.m. Our moderator, Chris, we want to give a special thank you to him. He has now posted for you that information. As indicated earlier, you will all receive an email giving you the opportunity to keep your places and to provide your testimony. Also note any written testimony should be submitted no later than tonight is our closing for written testimony. And we want to adhere to that so that we can have all of the information and have the appropriate amount of time to review it. Anything that occurred tonight and in our previous hearings is posted on the New York State Department of Labor website. And that website is dol.ny.gov, G-O-V. And you will also see posted information on the upcoming hearing. Again, thank you to my fellow board members. Thank all of you for your presence, your participation, and a special thank you to Chris, our moderator, for making sure that everything happened in order. Please be safe, have a good night, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you on Friday the 28th. Thank you.